I see open. All right, then it is 6:30 and we can begin the meeting. I guess Brandon, can you run through a roll call?
Absolutely. Let me just make sure we're recording here, and we are recording, and this is just for minutes' sake. None of this is going out. Roll call. Member Stone.
Here.
Member Fenwick.
Here.
Member Chair Kuzma.
Here.
Member Otomic.
Here.
And Member Barton.
Here.
All right.
This is so much more obvious.
Yes. Having done that, and prior to general public comment, we're going to take a moment for Brandon to read the city's statement on the recent pedestrian fatality that occurred on El Camino, and then we were going to take a moment of silence once Brandon has done that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a statement released by the Mountain View Police Department. Woman succumbs to injuries in February 9th hit and run collision. We wanted to share an update in the vehicle versus pedestrian collision from Thursday, February 9th. We are saddened to report the victim, Mountain View woman in her late 50s, succumbed to her injuries over the weekend. Our sincerest condolences go out to her family and friends. More on the initial press release of this incident can be found at a link on the city's website. We are also urging the public to come forward with any information, including any video footage of the vehicle involved in this collision. After the car hit the victim, it drove eastbound on El Camino Real. Thus far, our investigators have not been able to locate the vehicle or the driver. The car is described as a 2013 to 2015 silver Nissan Altima and was seen turning from Clark Avenue onto El Camino Real immediately before the collision occurred. The collision occurred approximately near the bus stop between Escuela and Clark. Anyone with information can please contact Officer Greg Lenny. And his email is greg.ine@mountainview.gov. Immediate inquiries can be sent to Katie Nelson, Police Public Information Officer, PIO, Police PIO @mountainview.gov. Chair.
Thank you, Brandon. And if we could take a moment of silence for the With that, we will move on to item 3, oral communications from the public. This portion of the meeting is for persons wishing to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. Individual speakers will be limited to 3 minutes. I believe we have a amalgamated presentation, in which case you can combine the 3 minutes into a single person's presentation. The committee cannot act on unagendized items, so yeah, or discuss non-agendized items. But with that, we can now receive oral public comment.
I was expecting a clock, but I'll get one up.
And it's, sir, would you like to have the El Camino intersection slides brought up or the other?
The other one. And I'll be here so I can be heard.
Okay.
Okay, so
Where can I go? In fact, if you'd like to sit and operate, you can just go ahead and press this button.
oh, okay.
Yeah, go right ahead.
No problem. Okay, well, I'm John Scarborough. I'm volunteering with the Los Altos High School Parent Teacher Student Association Sustainability Committee Transportation Group, or the LAHSPTSA SCTG, as no one calls it. So, what I want to do is share some information on Los Altos High School students who live in Mountain View. I'll be followed by Adit, who will be talking about a survey that the student green team did. So if you look at the map, the teal boundary is the Los Altos high school boundary is pretty much north of El Camino. It's everything west of Shoreline. And as you can see, most of the stuff in most of Mountain View residents who go to Los Altos are living north of El Camino Real. So there are different crossings that are kind of like 3 crossings to cross Central, the main one being Rengstorff. And we have a bunch of folks who live in the places north of Central Expressway, Montaloma, Rex Manor, Rock Street area. And then we have the crossing for Rengstorff, Los El Camino. So Brandon was kind enough to set up a meeting with us where he walked through from the community center down to El Camino and Distal. And there's a bunch of things from the pinch point right after the railroad tracks to different kinds of surface imperfections. And the crossing at El Camino is not good. And that's what we'll talk about a little bit more today. I ride to El Camino, I ride to Los Altos with my kids or meetings. My kids ride there most days, and I see a bunch of kids from the neighborhood riding there when I take my kids in the car. So this is kind of the path they take, going down, crossing over to the south sidewalk in El Camino Real on the east side of Distal Drive, and which my son told me was the favored route, so people don't have to cross over Distal Drive and all the morning traffic. There may be the 5150 development, which on the south El Camino may affect the south sidewalk, and the 2100 El Camino development may give us an opportunity, which we'll talk about in a little bit. After school is kind of the opposite, basically the opposite direction going north, except more kids in the afternoon cross over El Camino at Distal at that point because the light is quicker, according to my son. Okay, so there's some upcoming opportunities and issues. So the 2100 El Camino Real development may give us an opportunity to have a path around that property to go directly to Distal Drive. The El Camino Real refurbishment or renewal of Arbor, maybe we can get some better bike lanes in there or protected intersections like we have up in North Bayshore, or better sidewalks, better signalization. The 5150 development may affect the south sidewalk. And so what I would like is to encourage y'all to keep your eyes out for these opportunities for improvement and continue working, and to thank you for that. So I'll turn it over now to Adit. And
The other set of slides?
yes.
Hi, so my name is Adit Chinthamadani, and I'm here on behalf of Los Altos High School Green Team, the Environmental Club, Transportation Project Group. So in this presentation, I'm just basically going to be expanding on John's comments. So as you can see, this is quite a big problem affecting like a wide scope of students, because around half of LHS students reside in North Mountain View. So many people are actually utilizing this El Camino and Rengstorff intersection in order to bike to school. And essentially what I'm trying to communicate is that this intersection is not really well suited for cyclists. So on the right, you can see sort of like the image of the route that people would take to get to Los Altos High School using this intersection. And then I also have a Google Earth sort of view of what that intersection looks like from the street. So we conducted a student survey for Los Altos High School students who utilize this intersection. We solicited feedback from around 15 students, and essentially we had a few key findings. Number one, it's pretty hard to actually utilize the current bike lane on Rengstorff, especially during peak hours. If you look at the current image, you can see very clearly that the bike lane is essentially blocked. There's like no way for cyclists to actually navigate through this line of cars and access the bike lane. As you can see, going back to the previous slide, that's how the bike lane looks like during non-peak hours, but during peak hours, it's completely blocked off. So because of the current infrastructure, cars and cyclists are essentially merging on opposite sides, and it's very difficult for cyclists to actually access the bike lane that they're supposed to use to cross El Camino. Some more key findings in our survey. These are this is just a compilation of 4 survey responses that sort of highlight the main problems. Essentially, many of these findings basically echo what I've been saying. People don't really feel safe. People feel like the drivers are really not paying attention because of the current infrastructure. And people have had a few close encounters with cars. So some suggestions sort of echo what John was saying in terms of adding a more distinct and wide bike lane so it's easier for cyclists to actually utilize it, or have some dividers similar to what's in front of Graham. Graham Middle School has some sort of stake-like dividers that divide the road and the bike lane. And yeah, those are sort of some things that could be used to improve the experience of cyclists who utilize this bike lane. And yeah, that's sort of just an overview from the student point of view. And we'd also, really appreciate some sort of alternate bike path similar to what John outlined that could directly access Distal, or just an improvement of current infrastructure. So thanks.
Thank you. I am going to presume there are no more public comments. All right, with that, we will close public comment and move on to item 4, minutes approval. I assume there's no staff presentation on minutes approval. I see no public comment on the minutes. Anything from committee members?
I have read the minutes. They seemed accurate to me. I didn't see any errors.
Okay. A motion would be in order.
I didn't know if anyone else had any comments or.
No, they were great.
Okay, Valerie, I move to approve the minutes from January 2023 as submitted.
I'll second.
Do roll call vote.
All right, okay, yes. Then can we vote all in favor?
Aye.
Great, it's unanimous. Okay, that's it for 4 minutes approval. We have no unfinished business, so no item 5. And so we are moving on to item 6, new business, and we will start with item 6.1, the active transportation plan update.
Thank you, Chair. And we'll have our member of our consultant team, Tracy. You can sit right here if you'd like. Tracy.
Sure.
And she will present to you on the active transportation plan.
This is really close to the mic, so.
Okay.
All right.
Great. Hi, everyone. How are you? Okay, I'm going to take that off just so you can hear me a little better. And let me go ahead and get my screen going. You're going to get tired of hearing from me tonight because I'll also be the presenter for the local road safety plan. So hopefully you won't get tired. Great. It's great to see everyone again. I did present with my team on the local road safety plan, I think over a year ago to the BPAC. And so we're excited to be presenting on that project later on the agenda, but also on this new project, the active transportation plan. And we're happy to be here with you tonight to provide the first overview of this new project. we have the opportunity and the good fortune to work with Brandon on this project as the project manager for the city of Mountain View. I am the project manager on the NN engineering team, and I am joined by a great team of individuals with NN Engineering. Some of them, as I mentioned, we are doing the local road safety plan, so some of these individuals may be familiar to you, though it was a while ago that we presented. My colleague Drew Van Hengel is the principal in charge. We're joined by Mike Reeby, who's done, we've all now done a few projects with the city of Mountain View as the principal engineer, and Carly Haycock is also an engineer on the project. Deputy project manager is Alex McCurry. Corinna is doing most of the analyses on the project, joined by Snay. We have a visual communications person, and we're also happy to be joined by Samantha Suter with Meta Urban Design and her team. Sam is a landscape architect and urban design, and is also very well versed in community engagement and is leading our visioning and engagement portions of the project, as well as our leading the expertise on green streets and biodiversity as part of the project. So what we wanted to talk about tonight was really introduce you to this project and give you an idea of what it entails and what the project purpose and vision and goals are. Let you know where we are in the project schedule and what our next steps will be as we roll into the spring. So the active transportation plan is focusing on furthering the development of a healthy and sustainable transportation environment in the city of Mountain View for all modes, ages, and abilities. It is the update to both the pedestrian plan and the bike plan that were done in the mid-2010s. It's being combined into an active transportation plan. The plan will, as I mentioned, it involves identification of clear vision and goals in relation to active transportation. It will involve engagement, outreach, and educational programming. Some of the outputs from this plan, obviously, these plans often focus on infrastructure improvements that can be done within a municipality, in this case, the city of Mountain View. But it's not only going to be limited to that. The plan is also focusing on a review of codes and standards and policies and recommending changes that could be made to address whether some of those may be barriers to change and opportunities for active transportation improvements within the city. It will also involve programmatic elements that also non-infrastructure elements that can complement the infrastructure. Because again, it's not just building it, but also being sure that people are aware of it and utilizing it, and where we are communicating with the public about what the opportunities are for active transportation. Typical deliverables from plans like this will be, maps, as well as that prioritized list of projects, programmatic elements, and the physical projects that may be recommended to go into the schedule. I mentioned Sam's expertise in landscape architecture and sustainable development, and that was really one of the unique things that we saw as part of the active transportation plan when the request for proposals came out, that the city of Mountain View had a focus on sustainability in its active transportation plan, both because of the work the city had already done and has done in sustainability over time, and how that relates to active transportation, climate efforts within the city and the region. So Green Street design is a very important component and complement to active transportation design and improvements within the plan. The final deliverable, in a sense, will be a plan that will include an implementation plan and then suggestions for phasing of the various projects and programmatic elements that come from the development of the plan. I mentioned a couple of the efforts that informed at least the early part of this active transportation plan. The city has various programmatic elements, plans that it has developed over time. As I mentioned, the previous pedestrian master plan, the bicycle transportation plan, Access MV. We are in the final stages of the local road safety plan that is integrated with the Vision Zero action plan, the sustainability efforts of the city as well. Precise plans and specific plans that have all been done within the city of Mountain View. All of these are informing the development of this active transportation plan, but it's not just limited to that. The city of Mountain View sits on the peninsula. It sits within a county, within a greater 9-county region. And so we're also looking at what your neighbors and other agencies that may influence and have an opportunity to participate and complement and hopefully leverage active transportation within the city of Mountain View. What is VTA doing in relation to pedestrian access? What is MTC doing to support the development of complete streets within the Bay Area? And what is Caltrans doing to support complete streets and active transportation as well? And they are doing things, and that's really good and helpful. Not only at the district level, but at the coming from headquarters level as well. So we're looking at all of that to help inform the plan. As I mentioned, this one of the things that also stands out to us is that this plan comes from City Council. It comes from the strategic direction and work plan that the council laid out in 2021. So they identified that the vision for Mountain View is to be a welcoming, vibrant city that plans intentionally and leads regionally to create livable, sustainable neighborhoods, access to nature and open spaces, and a strong, innovation-driven local economy. And central to that is mobility and connectivity is called out as a priority in the strategic priorities and work plan. And the ATP is one of the initiatives that the council listed in its strategic roadmap action plan in 2021. Again, this plan is grounded in the work that the city has done before and it intends to do in the future. One of the things that we've been doing in this early stage of the project is to develop a draft project vision and guiding principles. We see this work as really our North Star as we want to solidify this, and so that when we run into tension points like do come up in projects and public participation efforts or coordination with private partners, that we have this to come back to as what is guiding the direction of the plan and the projects that will come from it. So what we've identified as our draft vision statement, and we developed this in coordination with the internal technical advisory committee that we've put together that has representatives from city departments, as well as we've just presented it to our active transportation public advisory committee in the meeting prior to this. So we're already going to be editing this statement. But this is the draft statement that we have right now. The city of Mountain View will lead regionally by creating an active transportation system that strengthens the community's access to housing, employment, schools, and other destinations. We also identified these guiding principles of mobility and connectivity, safety and comfort, access and equity, sustainability and biodiversity, and for the plan to be innovative and action-oriented. Again, to realize that these are the things that are driving the plan development and that are agreed upon in these early stages, so that we can point to them as we develop the projects and talking to community members about it. So, Brandon, can I pause for a moment and ask for, should I go through the presentation and get input? Okay. Okay, thank you. So, as I mentioned, the project has kicked off. We kicked off in the fall of 2022. The project involves many different tasks. We're still in this early phase of data gathering, assessment of the needs and the opportunities that exist. We'll then move into the development of the recommendations, work with community, continue to present to you and the APPAC and the Technical Advisory Committee on what those recommendations are and gather input, and then develop the final plan and again, do final presentation and gather input on. Engagement will be an important component throughout the project scope, the project period, and as I mentioned, we have the internal advisory committee, we have the public advisory committee. We will start a series of engagement in the community, doing some mapping exercises and other surveys that will be available in various forms. And we also just spoke to the APPAC about is opportunities to reach the communities that they work with, so that we are gathering information that is representative of everyone within the city. And so the intent is that the plan will be approved by City Council the second quarter of 2024. So our intent is that we will present to you in 3 phases. We're here today providing the initial project overview, and talk about the vision. We'll then come back approximately in the summer 2023 to present existing conditions and the plan framework to date. And then the final meeting will be to talk to you and present the draft report. As I mentioned, the TAC and the APPAC, we have other groups that we are meeting with as well. And then there also is a project website that was up, and we'll be adding content to that as well.
All right. Or is there more presentation? Okay, sorry. All right, then as part of our, I guess, going through our normal process, committee clarifying questions.
I'll go ahead, sorry. So, the scope, I guess, I'm hoping it encompasses.
One moment. Siri, not right now.
Both the vision and the design, as it were, and then follow through for implementation and enforcement. So, in the scope, I would like to see analysis of the city's planning requirements for.
We're doing the clarifying.
Oh, sorry, yeah. So can you comment on the scope and how, what is or what is not envisioned in terms of things like employers must provide, the city planning requirements would dovetail to that city pavement or other organizations would be measured against in implementing in terms of like repairs. We saw a Ringstorf route, for instance. How comprehensive is the plan and how much does it integrate city follow-up after the vision and maybe some design?
As I mentioned, the project involves the comprehensive look of active transportation. So it will look at identification of potential projects that could be implemented related to active transportation, but it also involves a review and recommendations related to codes and standards and policies that the city has that can influence those.
So would
Maybe
improve.
I can respond to this. So it's a high-level plan. So it will be lines on a page, essentially, in terms of the infrastructure. And then we have, I don't know, I'm getting this mixed up with the other project. So it is kind of a citywide lines on a page. Further design would then come from that. So that's where we kind of make our decisions. Like this gives us the big picture for the whole city, and then we have to pick from there for the capital projects, which would go through their own design process, feasibility, design, construction.
So would like code improvement be a project?
Yeah, that could be, I was talking more about the infrastructure side, but yes. So that's identifying the big issues and then there would be projects that fall out of that.
We will be reviewing various codes as part of this process, but there's potentiality for recommendations. And changing things would happen as a different, as part of the active transportation plan. So when it comes to actual projects, there'll be lines on the map, but we will make sure that these lines will fit, literally fit in the road and can be accomplished and are supported by the public to be accomplished. So I hope the three of us have provided clarity.
Yeah, I guess I'm just hoping that the scope is clear enough that it includes things like code review and how that can dovetail into the plan.
The scope does include code review.
And then things like management of asphalt. So we heard previously that Parks does trails, Roads does roads, and nobody counts people on trails, or the police doesn't take reports on trails, and the pavement cycle of improving, repaving every 20 years on roads doesn't apply to trails, and they go 40 years or whatever. So things like that are part of the scope of the experience that may need changing in the city. So should trails be part of roads, or should it stay part of parks and be underfunded kind of thing? Is the type of scope I'd like to see it more comprehensive and to understand that it is or is not doing that.
Member Adonic.
Okay, I wanted to actually ask the same question I asked ahead of time. Will there be an assessment of earlier bike ped plans in terms of how much progress had been made on their priorities? The answer I got is yes, a full existing conditions report will be completed. But the question was different. We've had like 100-page documents before with plans. And my question is, will those plans, in terms of their execution, be assessed as part of this process?
I can answer that. We will be reviewing those plans and seeing how they have affected the city. And we'll be moving with that review, part of the existing conditions review. We'll be moving forward with those outcomes in mind as we plan for the future. We do not have a plan or intention to do sort of like a report card or scoring sheet. That is for the pedestrian master plan or the bicycle transportation plan. That is not our intention to do sort of a quantitative analysis of those two plans. Qualitatively, we want to look at what they did, learn from the past, apply it to the future. If Ria or Tracy would like to add to that.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And I think the BPAC over the past several years has done a review of the plan as well. So that was part of how we developed the scope for this one.
Right, Thurstone.
Yes, in the document you mentioned you're doing an analysis of prevailing speeds where bike and ped activity does not currently occur. This is in the attached, the very long one. And you mentioned there would be shape files, GIS data available. I was wondering if we will be given access to those shape files.
I think the shape files that as we develop them, we can consider it as we go through the process and what your request might be in particular. Our intention isn't to hide any information, but we want to release information that is reviewed and approved by council.
Okay. I'm just very curious about that data.
The prevailing speed data.
Yes.
Member Fenwick, do you have any questions?
Not that I have, that weren't already answered.
All right, this is very novel. I had two ones. One, just I assume that winter 2024 is mentioned on the slides. I assume that's the start of 2024, as is consistent with the timeline that is shown.
In terms of us coming back to do the final.
Yeah, the final,
plan
yeah.
presentation.
And just confirming what winter means.
Yes.
Okay, and then can we ask for what, feedback the Public Advisory Committee for the ATP provided at the previous meeting related to the vision statement, since you alluded to there being some feedback, and that'll may guide our own comments?
Yes, I wrote it down. Let me look at my notes.
I can get started a little bit
Yeah, I
until
can get
Tracy.
started as
Go
well if you
ahead,
want.
go ahead.
So actually, I missed part of the meeting because of figuring out some other stuff. But in terms of comments on vision, what I heard was a request to prioritize schools ahead of other destinations. A lot of discussion of prioritizing safety, and also adding services as destinations as well, noting that some destinations are actually or some networks are actually destinations. So like Castro Street is not just like a thoroughfare, not kind of just thinking of it as a network, but also as a place in itself. And then connecting beyond Mountain View, so thinking about the regional connections and not just kind of stopping at the borders of the city. Addressing accessibility or elevating the issue of accessibility, including accessible parking and thinking about people walking from their parking space. And then strengthening the concept of inviting, in its vision statement, something about the inviting spaces, so it addresses things like public art and perceptions of safety.
Yeah, I think one overarching thing was making sure that the statement is representative of the needs of everyone within the community, such as the example of services. We have a representative, Tom Myers from Community Services Agency, and you know the many hundreds of individuals that they work with who are low income and are very reliant on active transportation, and so that word services being part of the vision, and because they are active transportation, and that the network is integral to them and their daily needs.
Rhea did a great summary. I don't have anything to add to it.
And I'll also say, then we also asked them for, as I mentioned, opportunities for engagement with their, if they have ideas, what are the various ways to, suggestions to connect with folks, and again, suggestions and folks volunteering the opportunity to connect, like going to the CSA and doing a listening session or a focus group, or the Mobile Home Association, and reaching that community as well, so.
Oh, and also provided some suggestions on reaching out to the school community.
Yes, great, and so it's great to hear, actually, the presentation that was done during the public comment period, which made me think of our meeting.
Well, if there's nothing else, that'll close our questions period. We will now go to public comment for item 6.1, the active transportation plan update. Are there any members of the public who want to comment on this item? Looks like no. All right, then we will move on to committee comments for item 6.1, with a reminder that we do have a specific ask to provide comments on the draft vision statement. It might actually be useful to have that up on the screen. But there is, I assume we can provide comments on more than just that, if need be. Does anyone want to start? Member Adamic.
Let's see. I have so many comments, but maybe just going back to this question, going back to the comment we had about Rengstorff, I'm a little bit skeptical about the whole exercise, so I'll just say that up front, because when I look back on the 2015 bike transportation plan, there's class 4 bike lanes on Rengstorff recommended as high priority, I think. Then I look at Access MV, Rengstorff between El Camino and Central Expressway is number 2 after El Camino, right? And so the reason why I ask, why are we doing this? And what impact did the previous documents have is that, we're still left with this very big need that somehow documenting and doing research and scoring and getting input and so on did not kind of move the needle on things in ways that, you know, I don't quite understand. But then onto the opportunities for what we could do, given that things have changed since, is I think paying attention to e-scooters. I was recently in Spain, and at least in many of the large cities, I was surprised not to find bikes on what I thought were like the bike paths. It was like e-scooters all over the place. It was just like e-bikes for deliveries. So I don't know, you know, probably we won't evolve that way, but I think a lot of the language is just pedestrians and bikes, and I think e-scooters might happen, so that would be good to know. Then, you know, kind of investigating autonomous vehicles in the infrastructure. I think that so far the treatment has been, well, unless there are injury collisions reported or something like that, it's fine. And I think it would be good to be more intentional, and especially as there's community input solicited, like no one has solicited really input from pedestrians, I think, about the impact so far. So that would be nice. And then as the skeptic for this whole exercise, you know, when I asked for reading up about green streets, you know, the first link, and I clicked on it only this morning, but it was like 100+ page doc, US EPA Green Streets Handbook. And I was like, I'm gonna read it. And I did not read it. So my plea is, how can we make this succinct and usable so that things like priorities and intent and plans are not buried under like pages and pages of like sustainability good and green is good and, you know, whatever. Like, let's get to the point. What are we gonna do? Because I mean, the other link was to the community tree master plan. I think I'm probably one of the very few people who has read all 200+ pages of the tree master plan for Mountain View and for Palo Alto. I just don't think we need that. Because people won't read it. And then, oh, very excited about reviewing fire code. I was so glad that that might be part of it. I was listening to a 99% Invisible podcast, and they said, you know, in Japan, they have small streets, and rather than bulldozing everything and making super wide streets, which would be unsafe for pedestrians and bikes and so on, they had smaller fire trucks. And it just blew my mind. It's like there's a different way to think about stuff. So I think it would be good to think outside the box. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited about all things, you know, active transportation, but I'm not as excited about like a large doc that could, again, and I don't know, maybe behind the scenes, like the people who matter really read this, but it'd be nice if we could all read it and all have a sense of progress.
At least one more person wants to give Vice Chair Stone.
So going to the vision statement, could you go back one slide, actually? I kind of like this more. Reduce single occupancy vehicle trips and make it safe, right? As a vision statement. I just feel like it's more pointed, right? This is what we want. And the other stuff is good, right? The biodiversity and et cetera, that's really nice to have, but the point is we want it safe and we want fewer people driving and more people walking, biking, and taking scooters and skateboards, you know. That's my feedback on, and I thought a lot of the public feedback that you read also very good. I like short vision statements. I like that sentence right there. Speaks to me.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So I like what I've seen. I agree a little bit with Lotta to some extent. Plans on paper are not enough. I'll say that I've made probably close to, a couple thousand trips commuting on Ringstor. So I was the one who requested some of the bumps be fixed and whatever, not far enough, but understand all that well. And I think we need to understand how the action gets implemented. So Mountain View's most utilized and largest parking lot, the vendor there removed their bike rack. Now, I still haven't figured out what bike rack they're required to put and how to get them cited for removing their bike rack, but Costco shouldn't be allowed to do that. It's the most utilized parking lot in Mountain View, generates more trips than any other retail establishment. And no matter what our plan was, it's not happening there. And they're also on Ringstar. So I would like to see measurement, how we measure success, both counting trips and people using it. I guess I would emphasize peak trips because investments in roads are often driven by peak trips that, hour and a half in the morning and 2 hours in the evening. We should be focused on converting as many of those trips as possible because that takes the pressure off enlarging roads, and also a lot of the safety issues tend to occur. And we should look at things as different as incentive programs. Palo Alto now has an incentive program that pays people to bike and walk instead of drive to the downtown area, for instance. Smaller fire trucks, different innovative programs. I guess I would take out the word regional innovative and put nationally innovative in there if I had my choice. So I think we should think big and look not just the street and the blueprints, but how the whole system works, because we can have great streets, and if you get to Costco and it doesn't have bike parking, it sends the wrong message, it discourages people. It's hardest on the people who are lower income and may work there or don't have cars. I really think we should push it and think about the whole picture. Code things like showers at offices and office buildings, bolted bike parking so it can't easily disappear, ratios that are clear just as they are for handicap parking, distance, away from the door, just like handicap parking. We should have all that spelled out, accessible, I think, and everybody or more people should know how that should work, and so they can participate and make it available.
I really like this. I'm actually really excited about this, having seen the two plans that we had before that were directing work for city staff. We had the bicycle master plan and the pedestrian master plan, and they had conflicts in it. And as someone who does probably more walking than riding around Mountain View, the bike master plan was updated more frequently and was also seemed to trump the pedestrian master plan. So I am thrilled to see these integrated as one single unit and with considerations across the board. Really excited about it. I share some other committee members' reservations and making sure we don't just make a lot of document and not some things that we can actually take action on. I think having actionable things. I also share the concerns about e-scooters and PDDs on the sidewalks. I saw those raised. I'm a firm believer that the sidewalks are for pedestrians. As someone that sometimes needs to use mobility devices, or with my family members that use wheelchairs or scooters, not like the scooters for fun, but scooters for mobility getting around. That space is wonderful. I would like to also additionally extend the comments that were here to say a little more data-driven as much as we can about, where are our sidewalks, where are our issues, what are our sidewalk widths. I really would like to also make sure that we address pinch points with what I've been told is called like street furniture, which could be utility boxes, utility poles, particularly like the sidewalk along Central between Rengsdorf and the San Antonio train station has utility poles in it much of the way, and then some greenery that grows on this sound wall that often will take up about half of the sidewalk. Makes it very difficult to navigate that area. A lot of things like that to just be more holistic in our approach. I like that we're being inclusive with the codes. It seems like a lot to bite off, but I'm excited about that. Also, and to echo Member Barton, like, if we say you have to have this many bike racks when you build this thing, someone shouldn't be able to just take them away after the inspector comes by. There should be some kind of, I don't know, teeth or something in this, or at least some kind of disincentive to remove bike and e-scooter or bike and other ped-friendly things. I'm not sure if it was clear, but I'm also a member of the, let me get the name correct, the Active Transportation Plan Advisory Committee as the BPEC representative. So I've given a lot of feedback and will continue to give feedback that way to the plan. So if you're like, oh, that's not a whole lot of things, but I'm really, I gotta say, really, really excited about this. So excited to see this being unified and yeah, just, I think I said it already, but to echo what Adamic said, please don't come up with like a 1,000-page document, like, keep it accessible. It's fine to reference other plans, but keep it accessible and keep it active and I think a living document. Really appreciate it. That's all my comments. Thank you.
All right. Then I guess I can make some comments myself. First, I always share some concern about, yes, things just becoming documents. The reasons I am excited about this one are, first off, I know these documents do help guide city policy and when we do the repaving of city streets, actually having laid out guidelines that were passed by council and BPAC to say, here's what we do with streets is very helpful. I do really look forward, and I don't think this really happened to a strong degree in the past plans of specific policy recommendations, things like fire codes, things like, at our last BPAC meeting, we looked at Castro Street, and there was a specific aspect of the city code related to fire truck access that meant that we were saying, okay, in a future phase of this project, we'll have to spend, I don't remember if it was 7 or 10 or 8 millions of dollars or something to remove a whole median. And it's like, okay, I don't have the perspective to say if that's a critical part of the fire code or a overly simplified thing that was included in the fire code because that was reasonable at the time. And so being able to go back and make those figure out what policy recommendations should be, and then in the future translate those into specific changes, I really look forward to. And also, it is just nice to have, to some degree we already have it, but just always having an updated list of prioritized projects with rough funding amounts so that we can just say, we get some funding, here's how we'll spend it, is always really nice. So that's that. For the vision statement in particular, I actually share some of Vice Chair Stone's inclinations to say vision statement should be small and simple, and I do like that one. I think the recommendations that were listed out by Rhea from the other body were reasonable. The things that I thought I liked being called out in that list were accessibility, which I think, and all this could be included or could be interpreted as being part of the vision statement. Just a matter of how you interpret certain words. But sort of accessibility with regards to disabilities, safety being really called out. And the one thing that I did not see called out explicitly is a sort of, and I don't know how it would want to be incorporated here, it'd be something around making more commerce possible. It's sort of implied by strengthening the community's access to other destinations, but there's things like delivery by things other than cars. There is an opportunity for people to do business in the city in a way they do not currently, that could be affected by the active transportation plan. So I thought that was worth at least mentioning. Honestly, personally, I prioritize, for me, the safety aspect is probably fundamentally the core of all of this, but if we're listing other things. Please, Member Don.
In all my blab, I forgot to say I'm fine with the vision statement. I would probably be fine with variations on the vision statement as well. I'm kind of looking forward to the drawing maybe like disconnected collaboration with Parks and Rec on like greening stuff. And I wanted to just, because Member Barton mentioned it in his question, but I just wanted to also say that I think it would be great to have the trails as first-class citizens. So I know later on we'll be talking about Vision Zero, but I don't think Stevens Creek Trail is on there. And, you know, maybe we're only thinking about cars colliding with bikes and pedestrians, but I think that's something that we really don't have good data on. So the only time that I saw a bicyclist scraped off of pavement by an ambulance was actually on Stevens Creek Trail. I don't even know how the ambulance got up there, but there was blood and everything. So that's like my experience of like an injury. And the only time I talked to someone about, I guess within Mountain View, is that right? Yeah, about, you know, ending up with broken bones and stitches and so on was like from a fall on Stevens Creek Trail. And then when we get the periodic pavement reports as well, like, I don't know, Stevens Creek Trail again is not really included there, but probably a bunch of the accidents are, sorry, they're not collisions, you're just colliding with the pavement, but are due to poor crashes are due to poor conditions. So I'd be excited if the trails are treated as an important commute route, and even if there are no cars involved, attention.
Yeah, I just, what Dominic said, just, yes, I have, you know, I have close acquaintances that have injured themselves on those trails, and because of infrastructure things like a gray curb on gray asphalt as you exit the park, which has now been painted white, but is now turning gray again because it's been a couple years. But there's a lot of infrastructure things there. So, and when I used to bicycle commute to work, I did so on the Stevens Creek Trail. And that's how, and I was not alone. Those trails are packed with cyclists. Post-pandemic, I'm not sure as much, but it used to be log jams. So is it just second, third, and fourth that's.
Was that sufficiently clear feedback?
It seems very comprehensive, yes. Clear. Brandon, anything?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for all your comments, and we will do our best to address them.
With that, that will conclude item 6.1. We will move to item 6.2, the Bernardo Avenue Undercrossing Project. I assume someone will provide us a presentation.
Angela, are you able to join us on Zoom?
I haven't tried, but if
You
you,
send me them. You did. You did.
yeah,
I'm just
if you could
overwhelmed.
just run it from there, I
Sorry.
think Dave and I can just stand and
Oh, sure.
talk.
Okay, there it is. I see it right there. I see it.
I'll sit in between you.
I'll just stand.
Oh, let me grab the screen.
Oh, you know, you can.
No, that's fine.
You're
Yeah,
comfortable
I'm
with
good,
that?
I'm good. I've been standing, I have a stand desk at home, so when I've been doing virtual presentations, I'm usually standing anyway, so. All right, well, thank you all for having us this evening. We're here to present to you about the Bernardo Avenue Undercrossing Project, Bike and Pedestrian Undercrossing Project. Next slide, please. I'm here tonight from the city of Sunnyvale. I am the project manager from the city of Sunnyvale side. Also here tonight, you all know Rhea. She's our project manager from the Mountain View side. And with us tonight and helping me with the presentation is Dave Dickinson, who is the project manager for our consultant team. Next slide. So just a real quick agenda. So I'll give an introduction to the project, give you a little history. Then Dave will take over and tell you about the project alternatives that we want to get your input about tonight and direction on, along with some design features that we're considering as we move forward. Then I'll wrap up with just project progress, next steps, and we will lead to the discussion to get your direction tonight. Next. So as many of you probably know, South Bernardo and North Bernardo have a barrier at the Caltrain tracks today. And so any modes of transportation, you can't cross here. The train tracks don't allow any accessibility. So folks who want to get between North and South Bernardo have to go quite out of their way. There's a lot of emphasis, as you're hearing tonight, about the ATP, and Sunnyvale has an ATP as well. We really want to encourage people to get out of their vehicles and use other modes of transportation. So we have teamed together the two cities because this is right on the project of city limits. We partnered together to move forward a bicycle and pedestrian only undercrossing that will go underneath the train tracks and underneath Central Expressway to directly connect North and South Bernardo for active modes only. Next. So just a couple pictures here to show you what it looks like today. This is the view from South Bernardo, and you're looking north and you can see the train going in there. Good timing on that photo. Next. And these photos here are from North Bernardo looking south. And so this is roughly where the undercrossing would connect on either side. Next.
Sorry.
So today, as I mentioned, if you are a pedestrian or a bicyclist, you have to go quite out of your way if you want to travel between the two. It's about 1.5 miles or more. It's a little farther for pedestrians because you can't walk on Central. So for a pedestrian, that's almost 30 minutes additional. And for a bicycle, that's almost 10 minutes additional. And most reasonable folks probably won't take that extra time. I think a lot of people will say, oh, I'm going to get in the car instead, which is not what we want to encourage. So that's really a main purpose for this project. Next. So at the top of the screen there, you'll see 5 different agencies are partners in this project. So being on the city limits, the south eastern corner is City of Sunnyvale. The other 3 quadrants are City of Mountain View. Right through the middle, where the Caltrain tracks are, in between those orange lines, that's Caltrain right of way, so it's their property, they own and operate that. And then Central Expressway is County of Santa Clara. And that little triangular piece there on the side is also County of Santa Clara. Additionally, we're partners with BTA. They have provided us with some funding, and they're also helping us with project management activities. Next slide. So work performed to date, just to get you up to speed, we started this project in about 2018, brought in WMH, and Dave got started on the project. Cities of Sunnyvale and Mountain View signed a funding agreement, so we're equally participating in the preparation of the current scope. The current scope is looking at developing conceptual designs and environmental clearance. So we're not yet at final design or construction phase. We're just trying to get through our environmental clearances at this point. But we do have Measure B funding that we received from BTA to help us with the final design. So we're ready to go when we get our clearance. So as I mentioned, when the consultant team came on board, they immediately started working on some conceptual options. They developed a whole broad range of different variations. And in December of 2020, we had a joint BPAC meeting with both Sunnyvale and Mountain View BPACs and presented that variety, got your feedback, and brought that back to the team, started making some revisions based on that feedback. In the meantime, Caltrain, also in 2020, started to put together their rail corridor use policy. They call it RCUP for short. We like our acronyms. But so they put together this policy to help inform and move projects through the Caltrain corridor and the Caltrain process, specifically for projects that are not rail projects. So our project as a bike and pedestrian undercrossing falls into that category. We went through a process with them, and they, the board, the Joint Powers Board of Caltrain, approved a use, what they call a use variance, which means that they will allow us to move forward with our project and help us with the project administration. All through that time, we've been doing ongoing agency coordination, both between the cities, with Caltrain, with the county and BTA. All of these agencies have seen the variations of our designs, have given us feedback, And we have taken those back, made a bunch of refinements based on that feedback. That's why we're here tonight, to show you the two options that we have. And we also had a community outreach meeting. I'll give you a summary of the input we got from that as well. But all of that feedback is resulting in the two options you'll see tonight. Next slide. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dave, and he can tell you about the project alternatives.
All right. Good evening. It's nice to be here in person. Last time we met, as Angela mentioned, was on virtual as a joint feedback between the two cities. And we had various options and received some really wonderful feedback that we took with us and integrated it into our planning process from that point moving forward. And that led to the two alternatives that I'll discuss further tonight. Next slide, please. First, I just kind of wanted to give you a little thought process on how we ended up at the two alternatives that I'm going to show here. And the first is we looked at where the undercrossing locations might be, whether they would be in various distances west of Bernardo Avenue or to the east of Bernardo Avenue, these being the crossings under Caltrain and Central Expressway, or even underneath Bernardo itself. And then we looked at the various access options on how we could reach those undercrossings in the best manner possible. So first we started looking at the Bernardo, North and South Bernardo for entrance points. And we looked at having straight ramps and then staircases at the various intersections, if you will. The problem with the long ramps was that they blocked the driveways on North and South Bernardo. And so then we started looking at, say, like switchback entrance, right? Because we wanted the entrance to the undercrossing to be at the intersection. So we could have a staircase perhaps, and then have that ramp switch back to avoid blocking the driveways. But that was so wide that wasn't really a viable option either. We're right away constrained on the north, south, east, and west on all these quadrants here. So the ramps on Bernardo didn't really work out. So then we started exploring the ramps on Central Expressway and Evelyn Avenue. And again, we kind of looked at the switchback configuration so that we could have the entrances to the undercrossing right at the intersection there. But same thing with the right-of-way problem into the developments that are on the North Bernardo Central Expressway side. We had issues encroaching into them, and likewise on the Evelyn side. So long story short, what we ended up with for the ramps is we have the access entrance points on the intersection corner, and then the ramps run along one long ramp, if you will, along Central Expressway or Evelyn. So the location of the undercrossings has been moved so that you can enter from a convenient spot on the to get to the undercrossing. So let's see. With that, I'll go ahead and. Oh, there was also quite a bit of coordination that went on with this, and we worked with Caltrain quite a bit. They wanted to make sure that we came up with the construction methodologies that would enable the tracks to keep running while we're in the middle of construction, and also had minimal impact on their operations during that time. And also with the recently constructed electrical poles, foundations, and overhead wires, we need to figure out a way to construct that in the undercrossing as well. So those are some of the things in the background. Next slide, please. So this is the western alternative. It's zoomed out. I'll zoom in the middle for better detail to talk to you, but I just kind of wanted to orient you. It's still the same as before with north being up, and you can see the limits of improvements that would be proposed along Evelyn, the Central Expressway, and Bernardo. Next slide, please. So this is the western alternative, and I'll start with the access points and perhaps the intersection up there at top with North Bernardo and Central Expressway. We're going to remove those free right turns that are in place right now, and slip ramps, if you will, and the associated raised median curbs. And the idea is to tighten up that intersection and shorten the crosswalk lengths and have a nice and also slow down the speeds of the vehicles that utilize that intersection. Have a nice entrance point, as you can see right there. At South Bernardo and Evelyn, similar concept. There's a free right turn that we're going to remove and tighten up that intersection as well to shorten the crosswalk distances and try to make that as safe as possible. The undercrossing location that you see off to the west, it's further to the west than the previous alternatives that we presented, and that's because we're running it with a straight ramp, and we wanted to make sure that the entrances were in the ideal location. And so the location of that undercrossing is really dictated by the ramps, and the ramps are driven by a slope for ADA compliance, as well as we need to get deep enough so that we can get underneath Caltrain and Central Expressway, and then have enough room inside the undercrossing. And what we're showing here will provide for a 10-foot vertical clearance inside the undercrossing. The undercrossing itself is as far west as it can go due to right-of-way constraints. But again, so what we're proposing is that the undercrossing will be 20 feet wide and 10 feet tall, if you will, on the inside. And the ramps that lead to and from the undercrossing, we're proposing maybe 16 feet wide, and we have concepts to make those fit as shown. There is an area that you can see there there's room for a skylight that could fit in county right-of-way between the Caltrain right-of-way and Central Expressway itself to try and bring in some natural light. And you can see some street improvements or striping in this case on the local roads. And I just wanted to say that none of the driveways are being blocked by any of those improvements. It's generally lane shifting that's going on. As you might imagine, there's some significant utility impacts that go along with this project. There's utilities that run longitudinally down Caltrain right-of-way and also within Central Expressway. But there's also a north-south corridor of utilities that run parallel to Bernardo that are just west of these intersections. And so this western alternative does hit those ones as well. So there's a greater utility impact with this particular alternative. And then lastly, there are some tree impacts. There are trees on Evelyn, and there's some trees in the median on Central Expressway that would be impacted. So to sum this all up, it's about a 200-foot long undercrossing with the skylight about a third of the way across, 20 by 10-foot cross section. The ramps are 16-foot wide. Some utility impacts and some tree impacts, but much improved with pretty nice access. Next slide, please. This is something that we wanted to present to you. This is an option that we had evaluated to have a dedicated bike ramp for cyclists that are traveling eastbound on Central Expressway. We're not recommending this option, but we did evaluate it and consult with the agency partners and others like that. And we wanted to describe to you the exercise that we went through. And of course, if you'd like to comment on it at the end of the presentation, please do. The benefits are obviously for the cyclists that are traveling eastbound on Central Expressway. There are a number of concerns that come up with that. Probably the greatest one that was raised by many was the inadvertent use of it by pedestrians, wherein they would travel down there and they'd get up to the top of the intersection there and find there are no pedestrian facilities and try to navigate across Central Expressway anyways, as opposed to doubling all the way back. And there's also a thought that there may be a limited number of folks that would use that ramp, those being primarily advanced or confident riders, if you will, along eastbound Central Expressway. It does require realignment of Central Expressway on the east side that encroaches into the median. The county wasn't too particularly keen on that because they're trying to preserve that median for other future uses. This ramp is not supported by Caltrain. They are not fond of having another retaining wall running on the other side of the primary ramp that essentially boxes in their track and their right-of-way. It's not supported by the county, again, because they simply don't want pedestrians ending up at that signal. I did want to note that we did look at flipping that ramp and to the west side so that it wouldn't be terminating at that intersection. Caltrain still didn't care for that one because now they have twice the distance of a retaining wall next to their right-of-way. And also there was some concern about inadvertent vehicles that are heading eastbound that might end up taking that ramp because the mouth of that ramp would be in the direction of travel. And then lastly, it has significant cost to the project. So for those reasons, again, we're not recommending it. Next slide, please. And this is the eastern alternative, again, zoomed out, so you can sort of see the extent of the limits of improvements for, realignment and striping and things like that along Bernardo Central and Evelyn. And now, if you would please, the next slide, we'll zoom in a little bit. So this has some of the similar niceties of the western alternative, particularly with regard to the access and the improvements at the intersection there, removing the slip ramps and medians and reducing the vehicle speeds and shortening the length of the crosswalks. Same type of improvements down there on the Evelyn and South Bernardo intersection. The neat thing about this alternative is that the county's has provided the availability of that triangle property in there that Angela described earlier. And that affords us the ability to break up that undercrossing and bring in some natural light. And so you would have two undercrossing segments, one that's 80 feet long and one approximately 105, but you would have that opening in the middle. Another thing that came up is that originally, we had to move that undercrossing about 25 feet further to the right than how we had originally designed it. And that's because of the conflicts with the poles that support the electric lines for Caltrain. Maybe you can see those little symbols just to the left of the undercrossing. But by moving it 25 feet, it sort of afforded another opportunity, and that is, the ramps can get a little bit deeper now. So this particular undercrossing can actually be 12 feet tall. So this one could be 20 feet wide by 12 feet tall, have natural daylight in there, and those types of things. It does have utility impacts, but again, they're reduced because they aren't impacting the north-south utilities that run to the west of Bernardo. And then there are some tree impacts. You can see them there within the county right-of-way, as well as on Evelyn. So, I mean, in summary, this is very nice access for this alternative. Has some great features with that opening in the middle. It's 12 feet by 20 feet, about the same length of actual structure as the west, but it does have that opening in the middle. Okay, and then next slide. Again, we evaluated this intermediate bike ramp for the eastern alternative, and we reached the same conclusion, but it has the same benefits, right? Providing some access for cyclists. The county is still concerned about unintended pedestrian usage, having people come up on Central Expressway, although it's not at the intersection, but ending up on the roadway and not having any facilities. Again, perhaps a limited user group for that ramp. There's also talk, and you may or may not agree, but these ramps are tying in very sharply into high-speed Central Expressway facility, where cyclists would almost need to come to a complete stop. And then again, there's tree impacts with this ramp and significant additional cost. The next slide, please. So I just want to talk real briefly here about a couple of the cross sections. The one that you're seeing right here is the Santa Clara train station. I'm going to go through a couple of different of these undercrossings and give you some dimensions on them, just to give you a little something to compare with, what you're seeing out there today versus what's being proposed. So this one's 16 feet wide, 9'2" tall. Next slide, please. And the Burlingame one, which is currently under design, that's 20 feet wide and 12 feet tall. And these modern undercrossings are obviously nothing like the ones that are being built before. These ones are following Caltrain guidelines right now, where if you have a undercrossing that's associated with a Caltrain station, then the mandatory width is a minimum of 16 feet. That's what you saw at the Santa Clara Caltrain station. Burlingame is similar to the Bernardo undercrossing. When you have an undercrossing that's not affiliated with a station, then they're requiring 20-foot width. And so that's what we're proposing, and that's one of the reasons why we're proposing that for the Bernardo undercrossing. Next slide, please. And then I just wanted to run through a few of these other undercrossings, some of the feedback that we received and some of the concepts that we're contemplating integrating into this project, and again, some of the dimensions on those undercrossings. The next slide, please. So here's the Santa Clara Caltrain station. I mentioned this is a 16-foot wide one by 9'2". It feels quite big, and I don't know if that's because of the nice architectural treatment. It could be because of the very nice natural light that it has. It also has light inside. It could be because of the arched roof. I wanted to point out that if you're familiar with this station, this is very similar to the length of the Bernardo undercrossing. And also you can see midway it has some natural light in there. So it's also kind of very similar to the proposed eastern Bernardo undercrossing concept. Next slide, please. And this is what it looks like on the inside. In fact, actually the opening on Bernardo eastern alternative is even larger than that. But again, you get it kind of has a nice feel. You don't feel as much like you're in a big, long, tunnel, if you will. The next slide, please. And then lastly for this one, just things that we think would help the experience that we've been looking at and certain things like you can see the mirrors in there. Another thing about this undercrossing that's sort of similar to Bernardo is we have those ramps coming in at right angles, right? It's very hard to see around that corner. And so, at a minimum, we're going to likely want to have some mirrors in there and some things, so you can see if a cyclist is coming from around the corner and things like that. So those are other things that we'll be looking at. Next slide, please. This is one of the older undercrossings. People love it because it's convenient and direct, but it was constructed over 50 years ago, and based on what I've read is that back then they just didn't anticipate the type of usage, from cyclists and others that we have today. So it's very narrow, and comments from folks, mentioned that as well, as that they like if the ramps weren't quite so steep as what you see there. Next slide, please. But they absolutely love the mural and things that you can do to make it feel better when you're traveling through these. And next, please. Here's Homer Avenue in Palo Alto. This undercrossing is 18 feet wide and it's 8'3" tall. People do like it because it's wide and it's got good lighting. They also like the separation of bicycles and pedestrians in this, which is something that we're thinking about as well. Next, please. And here's Stephen Creek Trail at El Camino. People like, again, they like the lighting, and they like the nice alternative to using El Camino. For comparison purposes, this undercrossing is 14 feet wide. The trail that leads into it is 10-foot paved with 2-foot shoulder on each side. And the next slide, and that'll do it for me. And thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to hand it back over to Angela.
All right, next slide, please. So I mentioned that we had a community meeting that was on February 2nd of this month. And between the two cities, we made a significant outreach effort to make sure that we communicated with and let people know this was happening. We want to get as much feedback as we can. The folks that were attending and the emails that we've received since have all been very supportive of the project. People are excited. They want to be able to ride their bike across here. Generally, people seem to prefer the eastern alternative, and that was because they really liked having an opening in between, so it felt like two shorter tunnels as opposed to one longer tunnel. They really liked the natural light of having that landscaped area that the county owns, to have a bigger area to let in some natural light, some open air, more flow, just a more roomy feeling in general. They also like that this one is going to be less expensive because we don't have all the utility conflicts that we have on the western alternative. So that was of interest to folks. But there were a few comments with regards to the open area. There was some concern about drainage. What happens if it rains? Should we talk about enclosing that instead? And as is typical with any undercrossing, whether it's for vehicles, bikes, pedestrians, whatever, we would definitely include an extensive drainage pump system, drainage inlets on the sides. And if you go through any of these examples that Dave just showed you, you'll see there's grates on the sides, and if you're there during a rainy season, you'll probably hear the pumps pumping the water out. So we would be sure to include that in our project moving forward. Some other comments that we heard was that people really liked the Homer example, the separation of bicyclists and pedestrians. So there was interest in us looking at that moving forward. There's also some discussion about flattening the ramps as much as we can, but also balancing that. The flatter the ramps are, the longer they have to be. And so you don't want to make it too long, but you want to make it flatter so it's more accessible to all users. There was also some concerns about the sharp turns, which Dave talked about. We've got some ideas on how to address that. And going back to the intermediate ramps and the concerns we had there, you know, people were also concerned about protecting the ramp openings on Central Expressway side and on the Evelyn side. And so we've got some ideas that we're working on to ensure that we're protecting those openings in ways that make the most sense for all the users. Next slide, please. So tonight, our main objective is to hear your feedback, give you an update, and also primarily to get your recommendation for us to carry forth to both the Mountain View and the Sunnyvale City Councils on which alternative we should identify as the project and move forward with. The reason that we need that selection is because in order to complete our environmental clearance, we have to have a project identified. So that's what we're asking as your main action tonight. Some of the things that are dictated with regards to the environmental clearance that we need to do, that why we need a selection, the tunnel dimensions, the depths, the ramp lengths, construction method options that are, you know, a little bit different because of the layout of the space with each alternative. So that's really why we need to get that nailed down tonight. Next slide. So where do we go from here? As I mentioned, we went to the community the beginning of the month. We're here tonight with you. In March, we will be giving the same presentation to the Sunnyvale BPAC, getting their feedback and their recommendation to councils. Then in late March and early April or mid-April, we will be coming back to Mountain View to the Council Transportation Committee with a public hearing item and asking them to make an action. That action will then be forwarded on to the full city council. And finally, in May, we will be going to the Sunnyvale City Council and getting their action as well. So the hope is by May, we will have a recommendation, we'll move forward, and Dave and his team can finish up the environmental clearance. Next slide. And that concludes our presentation. We are available for any comments and questions. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Who would like to ask some questions first?
I have a question.
All right, then Vice Chair Stone, please.
What is your kind of assumed turning radius for a cyclist if they're, let's say you go with the western alignment and they're coming, and they're gonna continue west along Evelyn? Like, what standards do you use to say they have enough space to make that turn?
So I'll ask Dave to chime in on that, but before that, I think that part of the design was dictated by some of the constraints. You know, we're working really hard to stay within existing public right-of-way. We don't want to have any impacts to private properties, driveways, property businesses, things like that. And so we're trying to do that, but at the same time, we're trying to maximize the ramp width and the tunnel width so that we can give you the most space to make those.
I guess I can't see how wide the ramp is on this picture, so I'm just asking, in general, what you assume.
Right, so let's say, I think you're assuming if you're coming down the undercrossing and you were gonna turn that way on the map.
You turn, yeah.
Yeah, and so the undercrossing itself is 20 feet wide and the ramp that you're turning into is 16 feet wide. It's a very challenging location because getting underneath the Caltrain tracks, you know, they want you to take I don't want to get in the weeds here, but they want us to jack a box through their right of way. So you have this rectangular box to get all the way through it. And then the ramp that runs along Evelyn is constrained by Evelyn. So we don't have a lot of good opportunities to wow it out. Right now, we are exploring options if there is a way to, for that box that we're jacking through, whether we can, if you don't mind, if I point it would be a little bit easier. If there wasn't a way to to create some kind of triangle over here that would in effect help a little bit, because we just simply can't go this way. And at the moment, Caltrain's only approved us taking a rectangular box, but
Yeah.
if we could do something like that, that would help improve it.
I guess I'm a little concerned about people making that right turn and maybe pulling in traffic a little bit.
Oh, wait, in traffic?
If you're going down and you're gonna go, I guess, west along Evelyn, you're coming out, and you gotta make a little U-turn there,
You mean.
Oh,
and you're gonna pull into your 8-foot bike lane. Like, if somebody makes that a little bit wide, they're gonna be coming into the travel lane, maybe. I don't know. I
so
just,
he's talking about coming to, at the top of the ramp.
you're heading south and you're going west.
Oh, when you get up here?
Is that section flat?
Yes, this is all flat,
Right.
yeah, and so it would lead you to, you know, to,
You could probably just go to the left.
oh, so you're talking about how you would do that. Yeah, so you have 8 foot, and then we have a 4-foot buffer right there, so that'd be tight, 12 feet. So yes, it would be tight.
And I think part of the constraints here, or maybe an opportunity, is you're at a signal there, you're at a traffic signal there, and so everyone who's coming out of the ramp should also be looking at, okay, who's got the green, and making sure that it's safe to move, so that U-turn may not necessarily be safest at that moment. So there's a little bit of caution because you're at a signalized intersection as well. Sorry, Brandon.
I'm sorry, Angela.
No, please, go ahead.
That cross hatching is flat area,
That's correct.
so it's not really a U-turn. It's a left turn. Because you're gonna come out and you can get your bike to go straight and you can look either direction and then make a left.
Mhm. I see, okay. I guess,
You may encroach on the other side a little bit.
yeah.
And just to be clear, that 8 foot is a big bike lane and then it's 4-foot buffer. So that's substantially larger than most of our existing bike lanes. Just to make sure I'm understanding the diagram right.
Yeah, it's just- sometimes if people have those trailers or whatever, they don't have it.
That would be very hard.
Additional questions?
I have one. So how does this tunnel design compare to the one proposed, I guess it's a tunnel at Castro? And what are the widths and differences?
I'm gonna have to ask Rio. and
Actually,
Brandon.
Dawn, the latest bits for the Castro. Dawn is listening. Pop into the meeting.
Hi, everybody. Dawn Cameron, Public Works Director. So Castro is a pretty unique situation with it being the entryway to our downtown, the access to the Caltrain station, which is a high passenger volume Caltrain station pre-COVID, and we hope it gets back there again. So we have designed the Castro undercrossing to serve what could be several hundred people in an hour. So the legs that go under Central Expressway, as you recall, there's 2 legs, one that go to each corner, are being designed to be about 25 to 30 feet wide each. And then the concourse area, which is the area that is under the train tracks, under the platforms that connect to where the 2 legs coming in from Central combine together, is going to be between 50 and 55 feet wide.
Yeah, no, I remember, I guess, the wide part, but it was more, I thought some of the ramps coming in looked disproportionately small.
So we have on the Castro side, well, first off, just say again, all ramps are ADA compliant. So they meet the slope requirements of ADA and they meet the length requirements. What that means, I think, as you heard before, is you either have to make them extra long or you have to have switchbacks. So because of our right-of-way constraints, like at Castro, which were squeezed in between a future platform extension and the street and so on, it's going to be a switchback situation. We are trying to keep that ramp, plus there's another ramp between the platform and Central Expressway. I don't remember the exact widths of them, but they are trying to be designed to be wider to help better accommodate bicyclists sharing it with our pedestrians using the ramps. on the north side of Central Expressway, on the side that connects to Sterling Road, it is, again, I'm sorry, I just don't remember the width, but again, we're designing that ramp to be wide enough that it can be shared by bicyclists and pedestrians. It's also a straight ramp that leads directly into Sterling. On the Adobe building side, honestly, we could not fit a ramp in. And to try as we might, there were so many constraints with Central Expressway and the Adobe building, which is a historic resource, and the just what we had available. I think I read that we were squeezing our ramp to fit less than 7 feet wide, would barely accommodate ADA, definitely could not accommodate bicyclists. And one of the comments we got during our community outreach on that one was pedestrians were saying, it makes their walk extra long to use ramps, and we knew it wouldn't work for bicyclists at all. So in that corner, we opted to go with an elevator to meet ADA requirements along with the staircase.
I believe the ramp on the north side is 12 feet and the ramp on the south side, so after you come across the track, it's 9 feet wide.
Okay, so yeah,
Okay.
I mean, that was my I think when we saw the diagram, it didn't have widths, but it looked disproportionately narrow. So if it is 9 feet, that's an issue, and it, these are wider, so I think these are probably adequate. We probably, if the switchback is still trying to be made wider, it definitely needs to be. I ride the Homer Tunnel every day. Sometimes the University Avenue Tunnel. The University Avenue Tunnel is probably in your 7-8 foot switchback that they have. That you can't really make it on a bicycle unless you're going less than 1.5 miles an hour or so, and usually you can't quite pedal around that. So that's the worst case, and it's too narrow. Castro one sounds like they're close to that worst case, or maybe too narrow. This one and all the turns looks more than adequate, I guess is.
Focus on clarifying questions. We haven't had public comment yet.
Okay, so the answer to the question is, these are bigger than what's anticipated for Castro.
The widths
And
may
also they
be,
exceed the
we had-
Caltrans standards. These ramps exceed Caltrans standards for
Caltrain or Caltrans?
trans.
So they have standards for trail widths and
Okay.
and multi-use paths. So if it's intended for both pedestrians and bicyclists, there are standards.
These are super standard, if you will.
To your point, the undercrossing exceeds Caltrain standards.
Member Finley.
I have a question. I sent it in and said it would be addressed in the meeting just a little bit. So I see two major alignment changes proposed, both the eastern alternative and the western alternative. One which impacts Evelyn and one of which impacts Central Expressway. And there was a note in the memo that there is, that Sunnyvale is also already doing or planning some realignment on Evelyn. Is that regardless of the Bernardo undercrossing changes, and how does that really all fit in together?
Yes, yeah, so that is a separate project. The city of Sunnyvale recently got some state funding from Parks and Rec Department to move that project forward. Since Bernardo is the city limits, we will be bringing it up to Bernardo. And WMH and the team have looked at making sure that multi-use trail, basically what we're doing is we're taking the bike lanes, shifting that width up to the north side, and then just realigning all the lanes. So we're not taking any right of way, we're not changing where the sidewalk and curbs are today. That project will be moving forward before this one gets to construction. But we've checked to make sure that neither project precludes the other. And we know that once we get environmental clearance, we'll go into final design for Bernardo. We'll make sure, we'll be farther along with the Evelyn multi-use trail as well. And then we can talk in more detail, design level at both projects. We can make sure that here it all conforms properly.
Great, and so that answers my question. That project is going forward
Yes.
regardless of what happens here.
Yes.
Okay, great. And then my other question is, when we talked about those bonus ramps, I think we'll call them bonus ramps into Central Expressway. Do you know what the speed limit is of Central Expressway around there? I think it's 55.
I think it's
50.
it's at least 50 here.
Okay, okay, so that's a pretty, okay, thank you. Some places it varies, it's 35, 45, 55,
Yeah,
so.
yeah, I actually just came up here on Central Expressway this evening and I drove through here and I'm pretty sure it's 50 here.
Yeah, and this is the last intersection right before Mary Avenue, correct? Which has got a lot of other ramps as well. Okay, thank you.
So, one additional question, I didn't see any data about the current or expected residents and employees at each quadrant, as it were, the flow estimates of who might use, what direction would be coming from south along Bernardo in the morning or afternoon on each crossing. Do we have any information about?
So we started this project before those projects, I believe, had developed any projections. I'm not sure how it all worked together, but.
I guess I
we have
mean
Not,
total within a 2 mile or 3 mile radius or whatever.
There's tens of thousands. I can get the number from CBD, but the East Brisbane Precise Plan plans for large increases in employment and also housing in this area.
Yeah, I guess I was trying to understand what morning and afternoon flows might look like and favor one configuration over the other.
we're hoping it'll be a really popular route.
Yeah, one thing we try to do with these, looking at east or west, you'll notice the entrance points to the undercrossing in both cases are, at the intersections there, right? I mean, one's on the right side of the intersection, the other side's on the left or whatever, but. And what's that recent development that's in that, would be the southwest quadrant, right? Lots and lots of apartment buildings there that we anticipate there's job centers are on the other side there, right up northern Bernardo, so they're likely to be used for that purpose in addition to others.
We don't have any other people have any questions. I have a couple. First, regarding eastbound bicycle traffic on Central Expressway. I know in a couple of locations in Mountain View, I believe near Wisman and also by the Steam Street Trail, there are bag buttons that cyclists can use to basically treat crossing Central Expressway like a crosswalk rather than having to merge into the left turn lane or the such. I assume that currently does not exist at the Bernardo Central T intersection. Is that planned to introduce those sorts of buttons so that someone coming from eastbound Central could press a button to cross Central rather than merging into the left turn lane? Or is that much farther along the design process?
I can't speak to whether that's a county-owned intersection.
Okay.
And so I can't speak to whether they have plans, but as part of this project, there will be a signal modification.
Okay.
And so that is something that we can take back and we can try to implement that.
Okay. Secondly, this is more sort of out of curiosity, but may be useful. Why does Caltrain require 20 feet in the state places that aren't near the stations, but 16 feet under the
Seems
stations?
counterintuitive, doesn't
Yeah.
it? I'm just quoting the book.
Okay, great. There's okay. And lastly, on the topic of two-way bike lanes, I do not recall what Mountain View's latest bicycle master plan to some of our earlier discussions were set at about Evelyn. I know there's a plan for a two-way bike lane between the Caltrain station and the Steam Street Trail. There's then another mile or so of road till here. I assume no likely future plans are precluded by this project, but is that being thought about?
Yes, so there is an unscheduled project in the 5-year CIP. So unscheduled means it's not quite in the 5-year CIP, it's kind of beyond the 5-year CIP, but that is one of the projects, is to fill that gap between Mountain View and Sunny.
All right. That's all for clarifying questions. We will now go to public comment for item 6.2. Do we have any? Please.
Yeah, I like the eastern version. And I like the idea of having it wider. I really like the Homer undercrossing, not the California Street undercrossing in Palo Alto. Mainly due to the darkness and narrowness. Steepness is kind of annoying, but not a big deal to me. But yeah, so if we could also get another skylight in the median of Central Expressway, that'd be great too. We could even more light in there. So and I think like the one that you showed at Santa Clara with the more arch-like roof feels more sturdy to me, more welcoming. And yeah, wide, light arch on each side. Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further public comment? All right, seeing none, we will close public comment and we'll move to committee comments. And we are being specifically asked about our alternative preferences for the western alignment, eastern alignment, or other, if we choose to choose other. But so who would like to begin?
I'll start if it's all right.
Please, Member Fenwick.
I think these are huge improvements from when we last saw this. I really appreciate all the effort that's gone into this, and I can't imagine all the hard work coordinating with all of these different agencies. I think that, sneak in bike lane in the middle of the road alternative came from a BPAC between Sunnyvale and Mountain View as a proposal. And I liked the idea and concept, but I thank you for drawing it out. And now when I think about the speed limits and the next major intersection at Mary that comes up, I am no longer in favor of sticking in any of those intermediate bike ramps, you call them. I'm not in favor of those. I was more in favor of the western alternative originally, but I really am sold on the extra light. I think that will make the tunnel feel more safe and approachable and a better, that gives us a little more opportunity for just being a nicer place. It seems like also we might be able to get those, I would say, back to our kind of what came up in our clarifying comments, if we could at all, and it sounds like Caltrain or Caltrans or somebody's making us have square boxes, but if we have a little curves at the end, that would make it a little safer, if that's possible. I agree with public comment as well that if, in the median at Central, if we could put another little natural light box, that would be great. I'm amazed if you can get the permits to move this much on Central, to move the lanes that much. And I'm sorry for the loss of trees, but I think this really is a much better alternative. And so I'm 100% in favor of the eastern alternative. Thank you. That's it.
Who's next? Member Barton.
Okay, I'll go ahead. So number one is I'm all in favor of preserving future options. And so the side ramps, if building them now is not necessary, but if there's anything that would preclude them that's built in, I'd like to preserve flexibility. I'm not quite sure what greater other uses the county envisions about Central Expressway that they wanted to prevent. I'm guessing they want more lanes eventually, which I would like to see us preserve more bicycle and pedestrian options in the future. So thinking ahead would be good. In that lane, I would also like the cities to think about, it looked like all the parcels in the first picture looked all ready for development. There's, the first photo you had, it was all parking lot for the most part. Those buildings are likely to be redeveloped over the next 10 to 15 years. And while this is a tremendous improvement, straight on ramps starting from Bernardo and other feeders, if we got right away over time, might make this more European than just, kind of the US one crossing only. So I hope we think about, as those developments come up, bringing more access and, a second tunnel or whatever, additional ramps into the picture. On Homer, I ride that tunnel every day. The tunnel itself is fine. The conflicts are the crossovers coming, especially from Alma into the tunnel, and there's no mirrors or whatever on the 90-degree, fairly sharp right turns. But yes, the tunnel's more than big enough. It's the access that is problematic. So do look at those. in regards to access, I see no bullards or no chicanes on here. That's excellent. You know, the problem with California Avenue is the junior high and the narrow width. The junior high kids like the fast ramp. They can ride through the chicanes, and the walkers generally are paranoid at that time of day. So I really like the accessibility and the elimination of bullards and chicanes and stuff that can be hazards to people on bikes. I think I covered everything I was looking to, but again, future-proofing it and thinking about right-of-way and other options in this design and build is a high priority. I guess I'm thinking the eastern alternative might be better for morning commutes, which would be the biggest flow, but lacking data about projections of residents and employment. That's just a guess at this point. So thank you. Yeah, if we had more data to favor the different flows, you know, generally I would favor faster times in the morning for the majority of the commuters. That might tip you one way or the other, but lacking that, either looks good.
Yeah, I would like to second Member Burton's recommendation to not put bollards or other impediments at the entrances. I've tried to develop an informed opinion about east versus west, but I don't know. So I think both are probably fine. I don't know how you could separate bikes from pedestrians, but if possible, I think that would be great. I do like the Homer undercrossing, but really any undercrossing. Thanks.
I want to follow up on my clarifying question about taking this alignment and connecting it with the mobile home park. Actually, there's three developments there. There's the mobile home park, there's some apartments, and there's a townhome that all share basically only one entrance on Mary. About 400 homes, and if we could take this alignment, and I don't know who you'd have to talk to, but if we could connect like that ramp, instead of connecting to Central, connect to that development, that would really open up active transportation alternatives to people living in those developments, and I'd like to, but if that is a possibility, then I'm in a strong favor of this alignment just for that possibility.
Any other comments?
No.
Any specific questions you were looking for an answer for there?
No, I mean,
Okay.
I asked a clarifying question if they looked at it, and I said, and I think what they looked at was the ramp, but the possibility of the ramp going to Central. If the ramp can go to Central, then you can also probably get a ramp to Mary, and it just comes to working that out with the property owners and all that stuff. I guess if I wanted to make another comment, I would say that I think you should take a little bit out of those travel lanes and make those bike lanes bigger. But, maybe out of scope of this particular thing.
Then I guess I will make my comments. First off,
On Central or Evelyn?
On Evelyn, see, you got 12-foot travel lanes and 6-foot bike lanes. And 12, I mean, you can get 3. I would say you could get 6, maybe 10-foot travel lanes.
Evelyn.
yeah. First thing, I just realized looking at the diagram, I think you mentioned that that the undercrossing on the eastern alternative could be 12?
12 feet tall, inside,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Right.
It's marked, I see a 10-foot on the
I
diagram.
know, yeah, sorry, that's outdated.
Okay, just making sure I heard you
No, that's-
correctly and.
That's my bad.
Yeah, okay. Then I like multiple other members, I have trouble expressing a strong preference about Eastern versus Western. I have a slight preference for Eastern basically because I saw the exact same thing that Isaac did. I actually currently commute to a office on California Avenue in Sunnyvale, and being able to cross the train tracks at this location instead of crossing at Mary would be much safer. even though I don't need to cross Central Expressway. And so if there were through access through the mobile home park to California Avenue and crossing Mary at California Avenue, that would be nice. But that's sort of a long-term view. That's a like slightly tips the scale in favor of Eastern for me, along with I do like having the light. And if the two projects are comparable costs with comparable timelines, then only small things are tipping the scales. With regards to bike access to eastbound Central Expressway, I'm not a huge fan of the reasons that are being listed for not doing it, because I think that long-term we should be asking, how can we make Central Expressway a more useful bicycle corridor, rather than saying it's not useful right now, so we shouldn't do anything. However, there's also, I don't think it serves very many trips to do that. And it looks like a somewhat expensive addition, although maybe not horrendously expensive. And so it just doesn't seem like that high of a priority to me. So I'm perfectly happy preserving that funding and political will for other battles. Yeah, it would be nice though if there were, like I was alluding to during my clarifying question, some sort of way for a cyclist who is going eastbound on Central Expressway or who wants to go from Bernardo to eastbound Central Expressway to not need to merge into left turning traffic. Actually, from Bernardo to Central Expressway is not so bad. And then, one thing is I was hearing some people were occasionally bringing up questions about conflicts or sharp turns. I think my impression of these is that the ramps and tunnels are much wider than any of us are used to thinking about. Like I've been through the Santa Clara train station multiple times, and I think those tunnels are plenty big and spacious. And so something that is 4 feet wider and 3 feet taller, I'm not concerned about the turning radii. I'm not too concerned about, unless traffic levels get really high in this, I'm not even too concerned about bike-ped conflicts. And that's something we can also address in the future at hopefully low costs, if we do discover issues. My one big thing that I am not a fan of looking at these diagrams is the right turn lanes for cars on both intersections. If we are going to be messing around with the lane markings on intersections, and at least removing the slip lanes, we should not, in this day and age, be having right turning cars intersecting with bike lanes on either intersection. I don't know if, to my point earlier about during the active transportation plan discussions about being able to reference plans, I don't know what our existing bicycle master plan recommends in that regard. I do not know what VTA's guidelines recommend in that regard, or I don't know if the county themselves has any guidelines. They probably don't. But if we're going to be redoing those intersections, I really don't want to have right turning traffic crossing the bike lane without a signal or such. And on top of that, there was in the responses to a clarifying question I had that alluded to this, there's a mention of there's increased traffic due to some developments on Evelyn. Presumably also means increased bike traffic, and that increased traffic means more conflicts on a unprotected bike lane. And so I don't think that affects the bulk of the project in the undercrossing. It might affect the environmental analysis because changing that might affect traffic flow, which at least no longer has to pay attention to level of service, thanks to state law. But I don't know what other people's feelings are on that, but that's something which I see us redoing an intersection and not fixing that. So I am calling it out. Yeah. All right. I'm not sure I guess the main thing at this point is it's probably useful for us to have an explicit motion on which alternative we prefer.
Yes, please.
We should probably wait for Member Fenwick to return. In the meantime, any other comments? Member Fenwick?
So can we go back to the photo diagram? I think your first slide before all the alternatives.
Before the alternative.
This one, yes.
Okay.
So I think we're seeing the mobile home park. I think we're seeing all the 1 or 2 story buildings. So the question is there a process to look at enhanced alternatives that might capture right away during the development and log that, whether it's 10 or years down the road or whatever it may be, that those buildings get torn down and parking lots developed?
So the property on the northeast side, that is going through a development process right now, and that building is staying as part of that. They have a transfer of development rights agreement with the school district. So that building at the corner there is staying.
But I mean, just in general, I guess the question is, how do we say that there are alternatives for, let's say, this project feeding into the tunnel or adding a second tunnel that could benefit from right-of-way access on developments on buildings in the area to negotiate, well, one, to suggest options as we look at the design, and then 2, to remember to negotiate it when it comes up. You know,
So I think that the design that comes out of this, that is what we would use to kind of require or request things from developers. So if it's not in the design, then we don't have a basis for it.
At present, our goal has been to avoid any right-of-way acquisition as part of this project because it enables the project to be statutorily exempt.
right.
CEQA, and we can get this delivered to you sooner.
Yeah, I guess I'm all in favor of that. What I'm saying is, you know, can you do an overlay that says 30 years down the road, this is what the project could or should look like, which will require, you know, access of right of way as other buildings are developed.
I think a different way of phrasing that would be, let's say the mobile home park were to decide to do some sort of major redevelopment. Is there any way we could keep the idea of adding a connection from that to the tunnel on the book so that it doesn't get forgotten about? Or is it unlikely to get forgotten about?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's out of the scope of your work, and that starts to bleed into like a general plan or a precise plan. Which is not to say that it can't be in those plans, but this is not.
Yeah, again, I'm looking to try to future-proof and think ahead so that when we're not here, someone doesn't say, oh, the mobile home park, we forgot to get a right-of-way for the, you know, 5,000 people that are living in towers there now or whatever, can't use this ramp or don't have a way to access it.
Since we're already, I think, a bit behind where we intended to, I think a motion would be in order for our preferred alternative.
We need a motion or?
Please.
I would like to move that we go forward with the eastern alternative as presented at BPAC.
Second that motion.
Right, and
Roll call vote?
or just ask everyone to raise their hands.
Yeah, that's right. I guess we can do that.
Okay, I can do that.
Yes.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstaining? All right, that was 4 in favor with member Dominic abstaining. Okay. We will now move to item 6.3, our Vision Zero Action Plan and Local Road Safety Plan. And I believe we get to hear a repeat customer.
Tracy, you're gonna share from your computer?
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Have a safe drive home.
Yes, nice to meet you too.
Thank
If you wanna stay over there, Tracy, I think it would be okay, but you can come here too.
If I could come over there, it's
You got it.
one more.
Where are these pastries from?
They're from the Midwife and the Baker. My favourite bakery. Usually I can't get there in time, but I got them before work today.
What's in them? What's in them?
These ones are vegan. The cookies are vegan cookies, and then that's an everything croissant.
And then Corinna is on the line.
Yes, so for this item, the project manager is Priyoti Ahmed. He's one of our transportation planners. Unfortunately, he's sick tonight. So Tracy has offered to do the presentation for this one as well.
Yes, and then my colleague, Corinna is also on the line when we get to the public comment and questions period in case we need her to provide input. Hi, everyone. Good to see you again. I'm, as you know, Tracy McMillan, and I am the project manager of this project as well. We are, as I mentioned earlier, we have presented to you on this project before, so what we're doing right now is providing you an update and based on where we are in the scope of work to date. If you recall, the part of the impetus for the local road safety plan was the work that the city has done in relation to the Vision Zero policy that was done in 2019. A local road safety plan is an important component of planning. In the earlier presentation, you were talking about all these plans that have projects, and then what happens. In terms of like the, for many safety projects, agencies now in the state of California have to have a local road safety plan or a systemic safety analysis in order to be eligible to apply for and receive highway safety improvement project program funding. So the projects, that's really one of the main impetuses to do the local road safety plan. And again, in Mountain View's forethought, they're, because they have this Vision Zero policy, the work that was done in 2019, the intent is to integrate these to ensure that the local road safety plan is comprehensive and holistic, that it's not just focused on infrastructure, that it is taking into account a multi-E approach, not just engineering, encouragement, education, enforcement, equity, evaluation. Local road safety plans can also include those components, but this ensures that it is there and it is in alignment with the prior work on safety that this has done through the Vision Zero plan. If you recall, we started this Vision Zero analysis in 2020. So, and we are a little behind the original schedule, but we are at the point right now where we are at the emphasis area and priority key segment and intersections piece of the project. I'll give you a very brief recap on the citywide crash history analysis and the countermeasure toolbox. We're going to talk a little bit about the prioritization criteria that has helped in the prioritization and identification of the key segments and intersections. And then I'll also talk about what are emphasis areas and the ones that we've identified. And then just close out in terms of the last two steps of the project will be to develop cost benefit analysis for up to 5 priority projects, and then to put it all together in another plan. So again, as a reminder, this project started with a crash history analysis. Because the project started in 2020, the data that we looked at was 2014 to 2019. As someone noted in one of the questions that came in prior to the meeting, that does not include obviously the crashes or any data that incidents that have occurred 2020 through today. Partly, some of that information would not be available on the data set that we would be pulling from, but we started the project a couple of years ago. So as you see, the total number of crashes from 2014 to 2019 was just over 1,200, with 77 of those crashes being fatal and severe injury crashes. And one thing that was important to note, in looking at the data by mode, you see a disproportionate representation of bicycle and pedestrian injury crashes, fatal and severe injury crashes, particularly in relation, when we look at them in relation to their proportion of mode share within the street. Some other findings from the crash analysis, we did see higher fatal and severe injury collisions at street segments that are 35 miles an hour or above. This represent approximately 20% of Mountain View streets, but they do represent 73% of fatal and severe injury crashes. We also noted intersections, fatal and severe injury crashes occurring at the intersection of 25 mile per hour streets with those 35 mile per hour streets. And it is important to note the collinearity between the posted speed limit and other roadway factors. We also noted that there are a large number of crashes that were occurring in the commercial areas and the precise plan areas. So based on what we saw in terms of the crash history, some of those roadway characteristics, the crash types that we were seeing, really, we had developed this countermeasure toolbox, and we, with countermeasures that we would be used, recommended proven safety countermeasures, FHWA and Caltrans proven safety countermeasures, again, pulling from the research and the documentation, and proven safety countermeasures that are identified by those agencies is important when you are putting forth projects for funding. And typically, these countermeasures are falling when we're looking at pedestrian improvements and bicycle improvements and other multimodal improvements. They are effective at helping improve safety for those different modes. So for pedestrian improvements, we've considered leading pedestrian intervals, protecting left turns, high visibility crosswalks, curb extensions, mid-block crossing islands, RFBs, and access management. Again, a similar slate of countermeasures, and some of these are in use, many of these are in use in Mountain View Bay Area, which was also another important feature. I mentioned emphasis areas. The emphasis areas are something that can be identified in local road safety plans, and they're an opportunity to really highlight almost like themes or areas that are coming out in the data and the systemic analysis that an agency in going through this process would identify as something that they would like to focus on and develop goals and strategies to address the emphasis areas. These are, we'll present later how they overlap with some of the infrastructure improvements that are, and projects that are proposed. But it's also an opportunity for us to, again, weave in that overlap with the Vision Zero Action Plan and look at those non-infrastructure E's that we were talking about in terms of education and encouragement. So the emphasis areas that have been drafted include the high injury network or fatal and severe injury crashes, obviously having a priority focus on those levels of crashes and that infrastructure where they're occurring. Equity priority locations, are there particular populations, racial and ethnic groups within the city that are disproportionately represented, and that is something that we saw in the data. School and senior center routes to improve the traffic safety along school and senior center routes throughout the city, particularly KSI, and reducing KSI collisions along school routes. Pedestrian crossings, terms of where pedestrian crashes are occurring. They are often at the conflict points that exist at intersections and mid-blocks. Bicycle safety, just to overall reduce bicycle crashes throughout the city, and whether they're occurring at intersections or they're occurring along segments. A focus on driver behavior, in terms of increasing the driver attention to the roadways and consciousness of other users in the transportation system. Looking at speed management approaches, and then a focus on data and technology, increasing transportation safety through the use of data and future thinking. Partly, some of that may be identification of where we're missing data, and are there technologies that we can get or support to improve safety going forward. These emphasis areas in the crash history also help to inform the prioritization criteria that we use to prioritize, to rank and prioritize the projects. Top of mind and the highest priority was a focus on reducing the severity of crashes. Next was, again, this idea of looking at the equity component, and are those looking at income and the vulnerable road users that are affected in crashes, proximity to key destinations in terms of where the crash locations are, or the road characteristics that may be associated with the risk of a crash. We applied those three elements in the first layer of the prioritization criteria, and then when we move into these more final stages of looking at the prioritization, we would be looking at the proven effectiveness and implementation in terms of coming down to like this final list of 5 projects that will put the cost analysis together for as part of this plan. So in terms of the segments that we ended up looking at based on the data, both the crash history and the systemic analysis in terms of what other areas of the city had characteristics that were associated with crashes. We identified these 5 segments. And this is how they scored in terms of, again, those first three prioritization criteria. All but California Street scored high on the crash severity. 2 out of the 5 scored high for the equity score. And in terms of proximity to key destinations, they all scored high. When we look at the intersections, again, that had crash history or characteristics associated with crashes, again, looking at these top 3 scoring prioritization criteria, we're looking at these 6 intersections, and 3 scored high and 3 scored medium in terms of crash severity. They all scored medium, looking at the equity score, and again, an even split between high and medium for the destination scores. And then this just reflects how these segments and intersections overlap with one another. So again, our early list included more key segments than was on that shorter table that we just went through. One of the things that we did look at was what are the projects that are already planned and scheduled within the city's CIP. So while some of these projects did score high, if there are things already underway, they were pulled off the list. They're already in a plan and they are moving forward. So the same thing was done
this is the full extent of, the full list of segments that was. And so that when we focused on, the top scoring locations on this list. Same thing with intersections. If intersections were already being addressed through previous planning efforts, they were scheduled, and they were also pulled from the list. And our intent is to focus on the highest scoring in those prioritized lists of segments and intersections. In relation, and in terms of what projects we would consider developing project descriptions and potential cost estimates for. So all of these, the potential project descriptions that were included in the memo and the information that is on these next few slides here are, I'll say, they're all potential. They're all dependent upon further planning and engineering analysis. So these are just potential ideas that we're sharing with you today. In looking at South Rengstorff Avenue, because it came up in three different sections of Rengstorff came up in the analysis. The idea with Rengstorff is to consolidate it into a streetscape plan. It relates to several, or the potential countermeasures that could be implemented along the streetscape plan relate to several, or most of the emphasis areas that were identified in the plan. Where the countermeasure list, again, focuses on infrastructure changes, but as I mentioned earlier, one of the things about the key items about the emphasis areas is also allows us an opportunity for to look at the non-infrastructure programmatic elements as well. So some potential countermeasures to consider that would address the collision types that we've seen in this section of Rengstorff, Class 4 protected bikeway, beach management, opportunities to improve the intersection lighting, extension lines and signage, consideration of a road diet and high visibility crosswalk. When we look at North Rengstorff Avenue, again, very similar in terms of the list of potential countermeasures that would address the crash types that, collision types that we're seeing along the section of the roadway. And then again, along another section of North Rengstorff Avenue, improvements in crosswalks, bike infrastructure, and awareness of crossings for pedestrians, and then the potential opportunity for a road diet. Shoreline Boulevard Complete Street is a project that is currently planned but not programmed. Is that correct, Rhea?
It's, yes.
Yes, it is not.
So it is included in this list of prioritized projects. So this is a project that is a little further along already. But it is, again, some potential countermeasures that have been considered in this location, protected intersection, Class 4 protected bike lanes, curb extensions, on and off ramp intersection improvements, and then pedestrian leading intervals. San Antonio Complete Streets, another potential segment project to be considered moving forward in this plan. Also has a range of potential countermeasures that could be applied to address the collision types that we're seeing, or could be address the roadway characteristics that occur on this segment.
And then we have a number of intersections, again, that came to the top of the list that could be considered as intersection projects that we move forward towards a little bit more concept level plan and cost estimation to be included in the plan. San Antonio and Fayette Drive intersection improvements could include bike and ped signal modifications on the north and south legs, high visibility crosswalk, a median crossing, and potentially a bike treatment bike treatments at the intersection. At California Street and Pachetti, right? Said that incorrect. Could consider pedestrian signal modifications, high visibility crosswalks, median crossing on California, looking at some curb radius reduction because of the greater curb radii, opportunity for some bike signal phasing and treatment at the intersection. Looking at Ortega and Latham intersection improvements, could be an opportunity for a traffic calming or traffic circle, increase the visibility of the crosswalks, and again, those are some pretty wide curbs, so can we tighten those up to reduce the speed at which vehicles could take those corners? And then Independence Avenue and Middlefield Road could consider some median crossing islands and then improve intersection lighting, extension lines, and signage. So those are all design approaches that could be applied to both segments and intersections. There are also potential operational improvements that could be considered to be applied in locations or systemically throughout the city. One of the things that we've talked about is, reducing the approaching speed and increasing visibility. We could look at no right turn on red, leading pedestrian intervals, that should say, not internals. Wayfinding signage, and then there are also opportunities in the California Vehicle Code and California MUTCD in terms of locations where the speed limits can be reduced. And then again, related to speed management, there are opportunities to apply countermeasures that reduce speeds at intersections. And again, what is available in terms of using changes in state law to potentially have speed reduction districts that are considered in various places around the city. There's always things happening at the state level in terms of legislative change. Automated speed enforcement is something that comes up often for consideration. That is something that could be advocated for at the state level as well, to allow agencies the opportunity to utilize that tool. So our next steps, we have presented this analysis to the Vision Zero Working Group just about a week and a half ago. We're here presenting to you tonight. Community outreach will be done in March, and then our intention is that the plan will go to CTC maybe. So for all of you, the discussion questions for this evening. Does BPAC concur with the prioritized key segments and intersections? And do you have input on the proposed project descriptions that were included in them? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Member Fenwick.
I have a clarifying question. I sent it, but I'm not really sure. Kind of looking at a map on the wall, in our old physical meeting room, we had like circles drawn around our houses for what we couldn't comment on. And I didn't have, I can't remember what that radius is for how far it is for whether or not I can comment on some of these
I think it's 500 feet.
So-
You own
I own property
1,000 feet.
1,000 feet. So I'm not sure if I can comment on this or not, because I'm not sure, I
What's the
haven't,
location that you're thinking about?
I wasn't, because normally they would make us like leave the room, and
You
so,
can comment on the overall thing. If
Okay.
you want to make a specific area comment and you live within 1,000 feet.
okay, and I think that goes for everybody, right? Okay. That was my clarifying question.
James rents, it's 500.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, there you go.
The advantages.
All right.
All right, additional question, clarifying question.
So my understanding is this is for specifically for roadway projects, intersection projects, and if we wanted like Vision Zero type policies for the whole city, that would be, it would not be part of this plan.
Maybe I can.
Yes, yes,
So,
thank you.
so it's taken, there's been quite a process to kind of, there's like lots of E's. So, local road safety plan is something that Caltrans is requiring for future funding for things like the highway safety improvement
Right.
program. And that one is very focused on the engineering E. Vision Zero has like 6 other E's. So there's education, enforcement, encouragement, evaluation, equity. Oh, I missed one.
You mentioned
Engagement.
Engagement, yeah.
And so they're integrating all of those. So, but the focus of tonight is engineering.
Right, so
But we
I guess my
plan-
question is, if we wanted like a citywide policy for lead pedestrian interval or some similar thing that applies not to a specific
Oh, I
project,
see.
but for the whole city, would this also be a place to advocate for
That's
that sort
a
of thing?
comment that you could make, yeah.
Okay, that was my question.
In fact, you know, you can comment on any of the other E's as well if you have recommendations. That's where we're going next.
Okay.
I had a follow-up question on the Moffett and Central. It said that a signal improvement addressed the crash type. What was the crash type and what was the signal improvement?
That was a response to a question you had
Yes,
submitted.
sorry, maybe Priyati had
Um, Yes, we already had provided that.
Moffett and Central Avenue.
Sorry, Central
Oh,
Avenue.
yes, so we have a planned project to do a signal improvement in that location, including an 8-phase, conversion to 8-phase signal.
Okay.
Additional questions? Okay, I guess I will move to, public comment for this item, but seeing no members of the public present, we will continue on to member, comments, and if you could put up the, 2 discussion items, I think that would help. Would anyone like to begin?
A lot, but.
Vice Chair Stone.
So I want to talk for a little bit about a few specific projects. Well, first off, I want to say that I really like the report. I think it's very good, and the identification of Rengstorff as a priority is something I agree with, and we've heard another potential reason to favor that. So my first comment is that with Rengstorff, unlike our other north-south boulevards, it's quite a bit smaller. And to make it a good, safe bike and pedestrian facility, we may have to be more aggressive in taking space away from motor vehicles. I really hope that we can accomplish that. It would open up, it goes through like one of the most densely populated parts of the city, north and south. So it would be really, really good to get that into a corridor that many people can use. And specifically, we've got this undercrossing that's coming up soon. So I guess my hope would be that we can get an idea of what we want Rengstorff to look like done so that we can inform the undercrossing project with maybe not what Rengstorff is, but what we want it to be when that, I don't know how far along that is, but
That's pretty far along.
there's a few things about that. Some members of the public have brought up that the current design would require the delivery trucks to drive through the neighborhood to get to the La Plaza Market. But also, just in general, if it's safe, it would open up people who live in the north part of the city to get to Rengstorff Park, which is an excellent park in a safe way. So that's my comment on Rengstorff. I think I would really like to see that be a really good bicycle and pedestrian thoroughfare. To complement, we got Stevens Creek, more on the other side of the city, something nice and safe on that side of the city. And then I want to talk about the further up Rengstorff, around where our lovely pastries came from. There's a few places identified, Old Middlefield Road and the Independence Avenue intersection, which I went around there for 5-6 years. I used to work up there, and my daughter's after school was up there. So I would drive there, I bike there, I ride my skateboard around there, and I agree that that intersection is super dangerous. There is one just next to it that recently got improvements. At least since I moved to the city, it's been improved. Just down Middlefield, west of there, there's one that you used to just have to walk across the median and jaywalk, and now there's like a dedicated way with a turn, and it's really good. And yeah, so I'm really happy with that improvement, but I didn't use that. And why didn't I use that? Well, because I'm going to Old Middlefield where my daughter's after school is, and it's kind of how the little bike, what do you call that? Bike street that goes through Central Ave and then up Stern and down Montecito and through Montaloma, and then it comes out there. So it's kind of like, this is good, it's local streets, it's safe. And then once you cross Middlefield, it becomes terrible. Like really, really like high anxiety, especially when I'm riding with my daughter. And yeah, that intersection is bad. But what I want to say is that if Rengstorff was good, and if Old Middlefield was good, then I wouldn't have had to cross at Independence, right? I could have gone up Rengstorff, and I could have gone over Old Middlefield. And there's actually, not only was my work there, and my daughter's after school there, but her old ballet school is there. It's like there's a whole bunch of stuff there on Old Middlefield, and a lot of it is kind of after school care, right, for kids. So even though it's not a school, well, there is a prep school around there, but it's still a destination that a lot of people want to get to. So my point is, I think maybe we should prioritize Old Middlefield a little more. At least I would prioritize it above that intersection. I think we should do that intersection, but if we're talking about a priority list, I would love to see some improvements on Old Middlefield. Yeah, it's very dangerous to bike along there, and people do bike along there.
Were those your comments?
I think that's all I had, yes.
We can come back to you as well. Member Donovan.
I'll have some slides eventually, but maybe that's not where I can speak to them first. So overall, I think I like the analysis and the plan. I agree on Rengstorff. I mean, Rengstorff is a street that I would find myself on every once in a while because I have to cross the tracks. And then I would be like, oh my gosh, what is this? Maybe I would like file an Ask Mountain View ticket and get off there and decide not to go back. And then it turned out that lots of school kids are using it. I couldn't believe it. So that seems like a definite priority. I had thought about Old Middlefield, because I'm seeing like Shoreline getting a lot of attention, and I'm like, well, that stretch from El Camino to Villa has already been treated. And so, we're going back and we're doing more on Shoreline. Do we really need to? And then I looked at the nice new map with the from 2019 or 2018 to today collisions, and they're still happening on Shoreline. So I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe we should go back and do more on Shoreline because that's where the collisions are. But I think what Member Stone mentioned, not in this meeting, but a previous meeting where we were looking at the collision data, like we don't have the denominator really. So Old Middlefield, maybe not much is going on there, but there's no bike infrastructure. So, do we weigh more heavily on the roads where people are currently, maybe because we have like inferior bike infrastructure, but at least there's something, and so you find people there. And so we want to make that better, or do we want to address things like Old Middlefield where there's really nothing, like you wouldn't go there? Maybe this then segues into Dana Street, which I see didn't make it into the top 5, but I just wanted to make a pitch for it because that in green is the Sylvan Park neighborhood, and it is allocated to Landals for elementary and Graham for middle school. And Dana Street, I mean, they have to cross 237 and 85. It's the only way. And so my son used to go to Landals, and so I got to talk with other parents, and they would just drive, even though it would be a relatively straightforward walk or, the bike, but you want to do it on the sidewalk with elementary school kids. And I know a kid who did do that with his parents, and now he's biking to Graham, and fortunately has the Calderon part. But again, like Dana Street, I don't know, and my son and this kid, like, I think that their hanging out time is impeded because I'm not confident in sending my son across Dana to get to the Sylvan Park neighborhood. So I think there's like a missing connection, and so even though fortunately we haven't seen many injuries there, I think it's just a very strong missing link. So maybe next slide. So this is going toward Landals from the Sylvan Park neighborhood. There's no sidewalk on that side, and there's no buffer in the bike lane. So I think that families would not feel comfortable going there. Next slide. But maybe I'm missing something. There seems to be a huge opportunity in terms of just nothingness, like this super wide median. I don't know how wide it is. I think it's at least 10 feet. And then at the end, you have like some smaller trees. So I think it wouldn't be a big loss of canopy. And while I was there taking photos this morning, there were a bunch of bikes going. I wasn't there during school commute time. Next slide. And then the next section, I think, is also a great candidate because it's just a wide road. The speed limit is, I don't know, cars tend to drive pretty fast because it's pretty wide. And then there's that weird thing where there's like the very skinny bike lane next to like the skinny lane. So you're kind of pressed against the cars. Oh, I had more to say. Okay, and then this is just a contrast with Dana further, where it like, this should have been like, oh my gosh, there's like a person who's opening their van door, there's a car, there's a bike, and they're all supposed to be in the same space. But because the street is narrow and there's speed bumps and so on, like this, I wasn't like, oh, something bad's gonna happen. So I think, like I see for some of the other projects, I'm not as sure about what needs to happen, but and I guess I'm not an engineer, but it seems like for Dana Street, there's a lot of opportunity there to connect kids with their school and with their friends. Yeah, that's it. And then, sorry, I had notes. I have one to see. Okay. Oh, independence. Yeah, I used to, so it seems like those improvements will help pedestrians. I'm not sure how they would help bikes. So I used to like drive to a car shop, have my bike in the car, and then like go back by bike. And that left turn from Independence onto Middlefield going towards Frankstor, like, I mean, there's never any traffic, so I guess it wasn't that scary, but like, it seems like the improvements are maybe half measures. Like what would be really nice would be to have a signal. Okay. I know that's like $1 million, but like if one could like have a beg button and a light and cross, you know, because we're saying like we're gonna have a refuge for the pedestrians, and already like there's like a lot of paint and signs, so it's not like.
Independence and Middlefield, right?
Yes, and Middlefield, sorry. Yeah, so, I mean, we could put a place for pedestrians to take refuge, which I think is great. But if it's really an important intersection, then I think it would be nice. Yeah. And yeah, but overall, I mean, all of those projects and intersections seem very, very worthy. And I have been noticing around town the lead pedestrian intervals, like all over the place, they're popping up, and I think that's great. Thanks.
I'm not sure about question one, because I'm not sure, I hadn't done an analysis of how close I am to, but I think I'm kind of close to some of those intersections, so I'm not gonna comment on any of them, so that hopefully my comments aren't thrown out, but I think in general, I'm for these E improvements, particularly pedestrian lead time, makes a big difference for myself, even when I'm driving to, you know, it's that, oh, there's somebody already in the intersection before I start my turn. More no right turn on red, particularly along El Camino Real, which is harder for us to control. But I think that in general, where we can use that lever, where in particular is a lot of pedestrian traffic, and something I would like to see in addition to some of these broader corridors. I mentioned it earlier for the other plan, but pinch points on the sidewalks. You know, I know the city's allowed some for ADA pinch points, but it's really kind of ludicrous because if you're in a wheelchair, you don't have anywhere to go. And I see even in my neighborhood, a lot of wheelchair users or scooter users for mobility, not the fun scooters. It can be fun, but using the streets instead of the sidewalks because of these pinch points and curb cuts. So I think in general, I'm just excited to see anything that's like making these intersections safer, and the types of elements you're putting into these projects, I appreciate. That's all.
So, yeah, I'll say I like the process that Vision Zero has. It's data-driven. We've used our rankings to come up with networks and intersections. I think that's all very strong. We should continue that. We heard about ring stores before. It's something I've seen two of the high injury or the severe injuries while I was on my bike in front of me. So it's very predictable that you know, it's a problem. It will take a lot of fortitude to remove parking and move fire hydrants and gather wear away or move the trees or the pinch points and things like that. I think we stick with it. I also like the ease of kind of the marketing and aspects. So seeing signals at lead time, which are mentioned, reminds you that pedestrians are there. Even when you're a driver, it kind of educates you. It says walking is okay. Seeing visible bike racks as you walk into a building says biking's okay. Seeing green paint and protected bike lanes says biking is expected. So I think, there's a virtuous feedback as we do some of these things. And the focus on the high injury network is one thing, and then patterns of even stuff that's not on the high injury network is something we need to apply. So the details of each of those injuries needs to sometimes be understood about what was missing. The pedestrian lead signal, is it the bike lane next to car parking? Is it even on Rinksdorf, the street narrows and there's the bike lane goes from 5 feet next to parking to 1 foot next to parking because they didn't red curb the parking in some places. So all the little details add up. But I think we want to continue with looking at the data to drive where we go. And with the Rinksdorf, it's destination heavy, it's equity heavy, it's, one side of the city to the other. So it makes a lot of sense. It'll take a lot of courage to push back, I think, on some of the existing uses. And the favorite intersection, I don't know how we ever let the county basically eliminate the bike lane crossing the train tracks and put in whatever it is 8-foot lanes when we say we always need 12-foot or something, but we've got to have the courage to tell the county or Caltrans or whoever wanted that.
Just which crossing are you referring to?
So as you're coming north on Rinksdorf,
Okay.
you approach Caltrain tracks. There's a light now at Piano or whatever. So the bike lane stops immediately. I guess it's 3 car lanes become 4 as you go across the railroad tracks.
Okay. I was just trying to confirm which crossing you're referring to. Thank you.
But it's an absolute mess for bikes, cars, and pedestrians. And yes, you should ride the center of the lane, and you should go when the light's red. You should go out to the end of the bike lane, and get in front of the car, so that they have to follow you. But most bicyclists aren't educated enough to do that, or bold enough to do that. And a little Shero on the street gets worn off about every 6 months because there's so much traffic. So I think just seeing education of people seeing other people how to how to move through intersections when they are dangerous is helpful. And like Junction in Rinksdorf is a school crossing at a 4-lane, 35-mile-an-hour street. That's a very predictable intersection for other severe injuries we've seen.
And for my own comments, I think that this is a good list. It seems to be made off of coherent data sets in a reasonably principled manner, while not being just like only pick the intersections where there's been a fatality, rather than also looking at like where we've had severe injuries and things like that. And I am very hesitant to have us suggest rejiggering any of the priorities of individual segments, since without having reasons for that we think are not captured in the prioritization criteria, because I think that just opens up room for us to have unconscious or unprincipled biases in our prioritizing things. But if we do think there's a legitimate reason why something's priority is not captured properly, then we could consider that. But even then, I think it's a good enough list. I'm inclined to just go with it. The one comment, I think I can't remember if I responded to it at the last meeting, but about Member Dominick's note on denominators. The reason we focus on high absolute numbers of crashes is because that means that's a single spot where if we could make a single improvement and removed all the crashes, that'd be that many fewer people injured and dead. Even if it's a huge number of people going through the intersection, it's how many people do you help with that one intersection improvement? If you have a really dangerous thing that only one person a year rides their bike through, it's not as big a deal to improve because there, you have fewer total injuries on it. Like there's a section of Interstate 280 in San Mateo County, it's legal to ride your bike on. It's only like a quarter mile long, but I wouldn't prioritize that for anything because there's a shared use path immediately parallel to it that got built after bikes were allowed on that segment. So that's, I think, why we don't necessarily talk about like per capita or per trip numbers for this. Now, what we do have to pay attention to is sometimes there is a potential future use of, okay, if when new stuff gets built or when there's more cycling and walking overall, will certain intersections or streets see more increase in traffic than others? But either way, I think the list is reasonable, and I'm hesitant to try to shuffle it around. I don't have any input on the proposed project descriptions really. I think in general seems like they will identify the right sets of things as long as we actually execute on them. And my general comment is just that the city council said we were to eliminate traffic fatalities by 2030. I still don't know what the timelines on these projects are and I get the impression based on past pace of projects that we would not have the capacity at that past pace to execute what we need to by 2030. If that's accurate, then I hope council knows that so that they can choose to allocate more resources in some way. If that's not accurate, then we do think that at our current pace, we can get all the projects we need done by 2030. Great. I don't know the answer to that. And to Isaac's note about policies, yes, I hope we are looking at like citywide policies as well. It looks like based on the project list we are. Seems like a reasonable list of policies. I think we had a chance to comment at this the last time Vision Zero came before the body. And I think that's part of why like no right turn on red is on that list with an asterisk on it. So in that list of policies in the second attachment was reasonable and looked like what I would expect and hope to see. I think that's all of my comments. Was there any particular motion that was required out of this, or was it just looking for general feedback on
Yep,
these?
this is good.
I have like just a
Please.
response. So
Oh, yeah.
I appreciate the part about like, is there something missing? And I think you brought it up with the 280 example. Like, is there an alternate route that is safer? And so I think a criterion that might be missing is there a good alternative? And this also came up with like Old Middlefield and so on. Like, if we solve one route, maybe we don't need to solve all the routes. And I think something that speaks for Dana is really it's the only bridge, as opposed to maybe some of the. I think each of the projects proposed is good. Like I don't see like a very good alternative to Rankstorf. I don't see a very good alternative to I don't know. Yeah, but I think it should be taken into account. And then for denominators, I mean, like one way that we could reduce bike and fatalities is to outlaw walking and biking. So I think that it's not as simple as saying, oh, we're just going to reduce the absolute number. I think what's going on is we're increasing numbers, and I think we do want to continue increasing them even in places where currently no one would dare like walk or bike.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I ask a point? Yeah, when you made that comment, I interpreted that as just because there is no evidence of crash doesn't mean there's not a safety concern, because people may choose not to be walk or bike
Exactly.
there because there is a safety concern.
Exactly. Yeah, especially with young children. I think people are a lot more conservative.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
the denominator you were talking about in terms of number of people walking or biking.
I think I just make a subtle distinction there. Like I think that belongs in the ATP, whereas for Vision Zero, it's there's almost a part of me that would say like, oh, if literally making a law that banned biking, pedestrian, and walking actually resulted in 0 fatalities on our roads and 0 severe injuries, that would at least be on the table. It wouldn't though, because people will still walk and bike, and over half, or something like half or more of our fatalities are from people in motor vehicles, not from just biking and walking. And so, and of course, it's also the case that we want to increase the number of people walking and biking. And so it's just, it's a slightly subtle distinction that just has to do with like, we were talking about the local road safety plan and Vision Zero specifically.
Well, let me just also clarify that the analysis was on crash history.
Yeah.
And it's systemic. So also then, what locations have the characteristics that are reflected in the crash history? So it isn't necessarily always associated with prior history, a crash having had occurred there. So some of that, this would be a great place to walk or bike, but nobody does. That's location that could be captured in that systemic component of the analysis.
Yeah, I just, I guess I've got what goes in this and what goes in the active transportation plan? It's kind of, because they're so related, interrelated. And I guess this discussion reminded me, yeah, what I want to see is basically a constraints analysis. We have this goal, right? What are the constraints that are preventing us, that may prevent us from reaching this goal? You know, is it money? Is it, you know, process? In the active transportation plan, there was the mention of, or identifying policies that may be constraints to implementing a good active transportation plan. Well, some of those policies are also going to be constraints in implementing Vision Zero, and I think that's going to carry a lot more weight. Like, if you're saying, okay, your turn radius or your lane widths or your speed limits or your level of service requirements or whatever they are preventing us from making the streets safe, then, I mean, you should say that, I guess is my comment. Say it loud, say it boldly, and use the same kind of data analysis that you gave us before.
Any more comments on this item? All right. Seeing none, we will finish with item 6.3 and move on to item 6.4, which is our fiscal year 2022 to 2023 work plan. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thanks for coming. Oh, I brought up the towel. Hold on, let me get to it. All right, as we normally do, I will run over what has changed on our work plan. Those are the highlighted sections. And so we removed today our undercrossing. It actually happened earlier than we had planned when we drew up the work plan. We had a review, excuse me, of the active transportation plan 1 month earlier than we had planned. And when we look at the TAL, you guys will understand why we needed to keep that up. And then we reviewed the Vision Zero and local road safety plan, which we just did. We reviewed that today. And that is the work plan. And now I will move to the TAL. And for the TAL, you see items that just happened today, and then you see as planned for March, Miramonte bicycle and pedestrian improvements and California Complete Streets pilot project. So both very interesting and likely to take some time projects. And then because of the volume of items we would have had for March, we have a special meeting on Tuesday, the 4th of April, that will talk about the CIP development, that will we will make a recommendation for TDA 3 funding, which would be based on the input that you guys had provided us in November. And then we will discuss this work plan and creating a draft work plan for the next fiscal year. Then in the April meeting, the El Monte Corridor project, which was also in March, has moved to April. And this works, this is also a joint meeting, talk about safe routes to school with Los Altos and El Monte is Los Altos. So it works very nicely. And then finally, Tracy will be back again in June for another update on the active transportation plan and then our normal collision review. We talked about this before, but just as a reminder, we did move the active transportation improvement funding June, as it is not as timely as all the other items that we have had up there previously discussed. But we will come here in June with the information that you guys have given us and recommendations for you guys to approve and with for the June meeting. And that would be the entirety of the work plan and other items we scheduled. That is all I have.
Any clarifying questions from members?
Question on safe routes to school. So does Montview have safe routes to Los Altos High School, for instance?
I want to be relevant to that.
Yes.
So we include Los Altos High School in our program as part of the Mountain View Los Altos High School District. We also include Springer, but actually their services have been provided on the Los Altos side, so we didn't end up doing the training there, but we have done we're doing a walking order and we have done some other work.
And the actual maps leave our city limits and go into Los Altos. Make it that.
Because I guess I haven't noticed any infrastructure in Mountain View that facilitates getting to Los Altos High. We kind of heard about a lot of the paths they take, and I don't see any yellow crosswalks or any facilitating movement of those kids. In fact, Los Altos actually, made it worse for.
Point of
This
order.
sounds like a wonderful discussion for April. Yeah. All right, any public comment on the draft work plan?
That's my ride home.
Member of the public. All right, any committee comments on the draft work plan and Tal? All right, then we will move on to item 6.5, the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee update.
Oh, okay. So, one thing that was a treat was an overview of the bike ped activities that the VTA does. So I'm happy to share that if anyone's interested. But for example, we saw that the VTA is involved with the Bernardo undercrossing. For the most part, they let the member agencies do their own projects, but sometimes they also get involved. There's various funding, like figuring out the scoring and scoring things. There's also like the VTA generates like these very long documents, which I was recently reminded of when someone asked about, are there bike parking guidelines? And it turns out in the bicycle technical guidelines that the VTA publishes, there's chapter 10. It's very, very comprehensive. So I know earlier I was saying like, gosh, some documents are really long, but I don't know, some are also like very useful. And then the main item was improvements to bus stops. They're going through and modifying, I think, thousands of bus stops according to how much they're utilized. So they'll put in improved shelters or shelters where there were none. They're changing benches from wood to metal, which is great, except in the middle of winter when they're very cold, but I guess they must be easier to maintain. They're coordinating on providing shade, so like with the cities, they work on planting trees nearby, making the sidewalk and the bus stop work together to be ADA compliant, things like that.
Any clarifying questions on the VTA update?
Question in preparation for the Los Altos.
Yeah.
Is there, so, one of the, I don't know if she's a wife or early investor in Google, has kind of raised her own project in Los Altos and gotten the county engaged about redoing Foothill again.
Oh.
Was there any discussion about that?
Not recently, but I'll look and see. Is it a recent development?
Fairly, yes.
Yeah, no, it hasn't.
I was just curious how,
Yeah.
I mean, money talks, as it were.
Uh-huh.
So I was just curious if that was official or how the county got engaged pretty.
I mean, we just get consulted on some projects sometimes.
Any other questions? I'm assuming we have no public comment on this item. Any committee comments on the VTA BPAC update? All right, then we will close that and we'll move to item 7, committee staff announcements, updates, requests, and committee reports. I believe we have a staff comments, and since we're still 20 minutes till 10 p.m., I assume we will hear them.
Yep. So just a couple of updates. Safe Routes to School, we've been doing some walking audits at the school. They've been really fantastic. Isaac came to one of them. Thank you for that. We've been getting some really good comments from the parents and being able to see some of the patterns of movements around schools. We plan to finish those out in early March with the remaining schools. We also have a new crossing guard at Granada and Montecito with some leftover money because it was took a little while to do the memorandum of understanding with the school district for the new crossing guards we got at the beginning. Go to the next one. Just a reminder, I mentioned this last month, but we plan to have smart cycling training, and we would love to have, all of you participate if that's something of interest. It could become, it's either to just improve your biking skills or to kind of do the prerequisites that would allow you to become a league cycling instructor, which we need more of around here. So there's 2 parts, the kind of the theory and then the practical, and they're planned for April, and I can provide more information probably next month after we get that information. And what's on the next one? Oh, and then this one is we had a pilot stop for the Mountain View Community Shuttle. This was the result of an Ask MV. So one of the community members requested that a stop be placed in this location, which is between a number of major barriers like the expressway and the 237. So we had a 6-month pilot period, and then we looked at it and we have decided to make it permanent. It makes very little difference to the operations, but it adds significant coverage in terms of access from this area. The ridership was not high, but the cost is quite low in terms of we just provide a stop. So that is now a new stop.
And I will talk about our Ask MVs. So we have November data. We're still processing December and January. February would be too soon. We have our November data here, and normally I have 2 monitors, so you're gonna get to see my notes. So I want to give you guys the highlights from that November data. We had a request to remove the bike lane on La Avenida due to a lack of parking by the post office. Or
By a post office worker. Oh, near the post office, I see.
near the post office, was by the post office worker, and also the Postmaster General also requested assistance to find more parking. Not specifically asked to remove the bike lane, but same line. Ortega RVs are blocking the bike lane and they would like, RVs are blocking the entire area and they would like to have a bike lane. So then the RVs would not be able to park there. There are cars in the bike lane on Calderon, parking in the bike lane on Calderon. And then a suggestion to stagger school times to reduce traffic and conflict around schools. From the numbers perspective, this is Ortega. That's 22 is Ortega. Everything else is pretty similar to what we normally get. No near misses reported in November. So I think that is a good. And then when it comes to Castro, we had one concern and one question/request. Concern being that the light at Castro and Mercy is too short to get across. And then a request for tables not just for restaurants, but for general use. And that is the staff report.
Any clarifying questions on the staff report? Seeing none, any public comment? No. Any committee comments on the staff report?
I am expecting, as it's happening in my own neighborhood, more of these requests for bicycle infrastructure to move RVs. And I love bike and ped infrastructure. And I'm just gonna say, for the record, I'm very sad that this is leading people to A, find Ask Mountain View, and B, make these requests, and not for actual infrastructure improvements. I'm sad. That's my comment on staff.
Okay. Any other comments on the staff report?
I believe that public access tables are part of the interim Castro. I don't know how that came to us.
All right. Then we will move on to item 7.2, which is committee comments. Any unagendized committee reports or the such? Member Adame?
Just because you're trying to rush things.
The goal is to adjourn the meeting.
I went down to Pasadena, and normally Pasadena compares favorably. Like our city hall is pretty fancy, theirs is fancier. Like our trees are pretty, your trees are even more pretty. But then our bike infrastructure is pretty good. Theirs is like practically non-existent. So I was feeling pretty good about Mountain View.
Any clarifying questions from the committee about how Mountain View is better than Pasadena? Okay.
Terry, did you have a comment?
They have a better parade.
True.
All right. In that case, that moves us out of item 7.2 and on to item 8 to set the time and date for the next meeting, which will be Wednesday, March 29th at 6:30 p.m. Still in person, I assume, barring new pandemics. And with that, well, we have item 9, the calendar, which tells us when more meetings are. And then we get to move to item 10, which is adjournment. And we adjourned only 3 minutes after the timetable we put together.
Good timetable.
We gained a lot of time.
It's nice to see everybody in person.
It is.